Welcome to the Post-Corporate Transition District in Aldea Zamatulum. This isn't just a retreat, it's a realignment. District, a reorientation zone for high-agency individuals. Leverage our liminal architecture and dream validation framework.
May 26, 2026. Part 4. The weekly METABOLISM Chapter 18. Monday. Cognitive synchronization with the accelerating landscape. The decision to begin the week with a structured collective engagement with the AI development landscape, rather than with any of the other possible opening orientations available to a community organized around post-institutional transition. The creative production session, the governance meeting, the community formation gathering, the reflective practice that some transition communities use to ease the week's beginning with a deliberately slow and inward-facing collective activity, is not an aesthetic preference or a scheduling convenience. It is a strategic and philosophical commitment that encodes, in the weekly structure's first element, the transition district's most fundamental conviction about the specific nature of the moment its community is navigating and the specific quality of engagement with that moment that genuine operational sovereignty in these conditions requires. The conviction is this: the accelerating AI development landscape is not background context for the transition district's work. It is the primary operational environment within which every element of the community's sovereign practice is being built and must be continuously adapted, and the quality of the community's collective engagement with that environment, the honesty, the specificity, the operational relevance, and the genuine intelligence of the community's ongoing understanding of what is happening in the landscape and what it means for the specific practices of the specific people navigating it, is a direct and continuous determinant of the quality and the sustainability of every sovereign practice the community produces. This conviction distinguishes the transition district's Monday briefing from every superficially similar gathering that the digital nomad and post-institutional aspiration ecosystems have generated over the preceding decade: the Tech Update newsletters, the AI Tools Roundups, the Future of Work podcasts, the innovation briefings, the digital transformation summits that the conference industry has been producing at increasing volume and decreasing signal-to-noise ratio as the pace of AI development has accelerated beyond the capacity of the conference industrial complex to process it with genuine operational intelligence, rather than the performance of technological awareness that serves the conference speaker's personal brand, rather than the conference audience's genuine operational needs. The Monday briefing is not a performance of technological awareness. It is the specific communal practice of genuine cognitive synchronization, the practice of a community of sovereign practitioners maintaining, collectively and through the specific quality of genuine peer engagement that no solo consumption of AI news can replicate, the specific quality of up-to-date operational understanding of the developing landscape that the sovereign practice of each community member requires for its continued relevance and its continued adaptability. The distinction between cognitive synchronization and information consumption is the most important distinction the Monday briefing's design must maintain, because information consumption is what the solo practitioner can achieve through individual engagement with the available content channels, while cognitive synchronization is what only the community can achieve and what the community's collective intelligence makes available in ways that are genuinely superior to any individual solo processing of the same information. The solo practitioner who reads the week's AI development coverage and listens to the relevant podcasts and follows the relevant accounts on the relevant platforms and processes the resulting information through their own individual cognitive framework has consumed the information but has not synchronized with the landscape in the specific sense the Monday briefing is designed to produce. The synchronization requires the specific additional dimension that community engagement with the information provides. The encounter with other people's responses to the same information, filtered through their specific different cognitive frameworks, their specific different operational contexts, their specific different prior experiences with the technologies being discussed, and their specific different assessments of the implications of the week's developments for the specific different sovereign practices they are each engaged in building. This encounter, the collision of multiple genuinely different perspectives on the same information set, in a community context that makes the collision productive rather than merely discordant, is what converts the week's AI development information from content that has been consumed into a cognitive landscape that has been genuinely mapped from multiple perspectives simultaneously, in ways that reveal the specific features of the landscape that any single perspective's mapping would leave invisible. The specific features of the AI development landscape that the community's collective intelligence reveals in ways that individual processing cannot are worth specifying, because the specification clarifies what the Monday briefing is actually accomplishing beyond the more obvious function of keeping the community current with the week's developments. The first feature is the differential impact mapping, the identification of which specific developments in the week's AI landscape have significant implications for which specific domains of sovereign practice represented in the community's membership, as opposed to which developments are primarily relevant to the broader AI industry discourse without direct operational implications for the specific practices the community is engaged in. The individual practitioner, processing the week's developments through their own single domain perspective, is likely to overweight the developments that are most directly relevant to their own specific domain and underweight those that are most directly relevant to other domains, producing a mapping of the landscape that is accurate for their own narrow strip of operational concern and systematically incomplete for every other strip. The community's collective processing, by contrast, produces a mapping in which each domain's relevant developments are identified by the practitioners most directly engaged with that domain, whose specific operational experience gives them the most sensitive detection of the implications that might be invisible to practitioners engaged with different domains, and made available to the entire community through the briefing's shared processing, giving each community member access to the differential impact mapping across all the domains the community collectively represents rather than only their own. The second feature is the trajectory reading, the identification of where the week's specific developments fit in the longer arc of the landscape's development, as opposed to the assessment of each development's significance in isolation from the trajectory within which it is occurring. Trajectory reading is the cognitive capability most directly relevant to the sovereign practitioner's strategic decisions, the decisions about which capabilities to develop, which tools to integrate into their practice, which opportunities to pursue and which to defer, which aspects of their current practice to begin transitioning away from before the transition is forced by the landscape's development rather than chosen in the practitioner's own timing. And it is the capability most consistently impaired by the solo consumption of AI development news, because the news cycles focus on the specific new development rather than the trajectory within which it is occurring produces an information diet that is rich in individual data points and poor in the pattern recognition that makes individual data points strategically meaningful. The community's collective trajectory reading, the conversation in which multiple practitioners' different prior exposures to the landscape's development history and different frameworks for pattern recognition in complex technological change combine to produce a collective assessment of the trajectory that is more accurate and more strategically useful than any individual's assessment, is one of the Monday briefing's most important products, and it is the product that is most directly enabled by the specific quality of the community's temporal depth. The fact that the community has been having this conversation, with varying membership and varying specific focus, continuously over a sufficient period of time for the collective intelligence to have developed genuine institutional memory of the trajectory's prior phases. The third feature is the operational translation, the conversion of the week's AI development information from the technical and industry-focused language in which it is primarily reported into the specific operational vocabulary that makes it actionable for the sovereign practitioner's specific daily practice. The gap between the AI development landscape as reported in the technical and industry press and the AI development landscape as it is operationally relevant to the sovereign publisher or the sovereign consultant or the sovereign educator or the sovereign researcher or the sovereign creative practitioner is a gap that the individual practitioner must bridge alone if they are processing the information without community support, must translate through their own effort and with their own partial knowledge of both the technical language being used and the operational context being addressed, between the world of AI development discourse and the world of their own specific practice. This translation is effortful and frequently imperfect, producing either the overtranslation that attributes more immediate operational relevance to a development than it actually has, leading to premature and costly reorientation of the practice toward a tool or a capability that is not yet reliable enough for production use, or the undertranslation that attributes less operational relevance than the development actually has, leading to delayed and costly recognition of an opportunity or a threat that the landscape's development has made present and that the delayed recognition has made more expensive to respond to. The community's collective operational translation is more accurate and less effortful than the individual practitioner's solo translation because each community member contributes to the collective translation process Their specific knowledge of the specific operational domain their practice is engaged in, making the translation from technical development to operational relevance in their own domain faster and more accurate than any individual without that specific domain knowledge could. Make it, and receives, from the other community members' contributions, the translations in the other domains that their own domain knowledge does not equip them to make accurately. The result is a collective operational translation of the week's AI landscape that covers all the domains the community collectively represents with the specific accuracy of domain-specific operational knowledge. A translation that is genuinely actionable for each community member rather than generally indicative in the generic terms that the technical press's operational commentary, addressed to no specific operational domain and therefore not fully accurate for any, consistently provides. The structure of the Monday briefing is organized around the production of these three features: differential impact mapping, trajectory reading, and operational translation, through a specific sequence of activities whose design reflects the specific cognitive requirements of the production process and the specific social conditions under which the production is most effectively accomplished. The sequence has three primary phases: the curated summary, the facilitated engagement, and the practitioner roundtable. Each phase serves a specific function in the overall production of the cognitive synchronization that is the briefing's purpose, and each phase's design must be maintained with the specific discipline that prevents the phase from drifting into the less productive alternative that the path of least resistance in each phase's facilitation tends toward. The curated summary is the briefing's opening phase, and its purpose is the provision of the shared information base on which the subsequent phase's collective processing will operate. The curated summary is not a news broadcast. It is a specifically curated selection of the week's AI developments that have been assessed, prior to the briefing, for their operational relevance to the community's membership, assessed not against the standard of what was most widely discussed in the AI development discourse of the preceding week, which is a standard that consistently overweights the developments with the most effective public relations and the most provocative public framing and underweights the developments with the most genuine operational significance, but against the standard of what has the most direct and most immediate implications for the specific sovereign practices that the community's membership is engaged in building. The curation function, the specific prior work of identifying, from the week's considerable volume of AI development coverage, the specific developments that meet the operational relevance threshold, is the Monday briefing's most demanding preparatory requirement and the one whose quality most directly determines the quality of the entire briefing. The curation must be performed by a practitioner with sufficient breadth of operational knowledge to assess relevance across the full range of domains the community's practices address, not the AI development enthusiast whose breadth of technical knowledge is extensive but whose breadth of operational knowledge across the different sovereign practice domains the community represents is insufficient for accurate cross-domain relevance assessment, and not the practitioner with deep operational knowledge of a single domain whose relevance assessment will be accurate for their own domain and systematically biased toward developments with implications for that domain over developments with implications for others. The ideal curator is a person with the specific combination of genuine operational knowledge across multiple sovereign practice domains and genuine technical literacy in the AI development landscape, a combination that is rare and that the community must therefore develop deliberately rather than assuming it will be available in the founding cohort's natural distribution of capabilities. The curated summaries format is brief and structured, not a comprehensive account of everything relevant that occurred in the preceding week, which would produce a briefing of unmanageable length and of insufficient focus to generate the genuine collective processing that the briefing is designed to produce, but a selection of between 5 and 8 developments that together represent the week's most operationally significant movements in the landscape, presented in the specific format that most effectively supports the subsequent phases processing. Each development is presented in 3 layers: a factual description of what occurred, a preliminary assessment of its operational implications across the community's primary practice domains, and a specific question, the curator's assessment of the most important open question that the development generates for the community's collective intelligence to engage with. The preliminary assessment is explicitly framed as preliminary, as the curator's individual assessment that is being submitted to the community's collective processing for validation, correction, and expansion rather than as the authoritative interpretation that the community is being invited to accept. The specific question is the most important element of the curated summaries format, because it is the element that converts the summary from a broadcast into an invitation, from the provision of information to the initiation of the genuine collective engagement that the briefing's value is generated through. The facilitated engagement is the briefing's central phase, and it is the phase in which the specific quality of the community's collective intelligence is most directly expressed and most directly productive. The facilitated engagement is a structured conversation, not the free-form discussion that the unstructured briefing tends to produce, in which the most verbally dominant community members' perspectives occupy the conversation disproportionately and the less verbally dominant members' perspectives, which are frequently the perspectives most different from the dominant perspectives and therefore the perspectives most valuable for the differential impact mapping and the trajectory reading, are consistently underrepresented, but a specifically structured exchange in which the facilitation actively ensures that the community's full range of perspectives is brought to bear on each development's assessment. The facilitation's primary structural tool is what this handbook calls the domain rotation, the specific practice of explicitly eliciting, for each development in the curated summary, the perspective of practitioners in each of the community's primary sovereign practice domains, before the conversation is open to the general exchange that the facilitation's second movement enables. The domain rotation is not a round-robin of identical questions posed to each practitioner in sequence. It is a targeted elicitation of domain-specific perspectives that the facilitator identifies in real time as most likely to contain the specific operational knowledge that the development's differential impact mapping most needs. The publisher's perspective on the implications of the week's development in AI-assisted content generation tools is not the same as the educator's perspective on the same development, and both are not the same as the consultant's perspective, and all three together reveal dimensions of the development's operational implications that none individually makes visible. The domain rotation's value is the specific enrichment of the collective assessment that the combination of domain-specific perspectives produces, an enrichment that is only achievable through the facilitation's active elicitation of the perspectives that the natural social dynamics of the open discussion would consistently leave unelicited. The facilitation's second movement, the general exchange that follows the domain rotation, is where the trajectory reading and the operational translation most productively occur. The domain rotation has provided the raw material, the range of domain-specific perspectives on the week's developments, each accurate within its specific operational context and collectively revealing the differential pattern of the landscape's movement. The general exchange is where the community's collective intelligence processes this raw material into the trajectory reading, the identification of the pattern that the week's specific developments reveal in the longer arc of the landscape's movement, and the operational translation, the conversion of the specific implications for specific domains into the specific actionable guidance that the community's members can carry into their week's practice. The facilitator's role in the general exchange is the maintenance of the conversation's operational focus against the two failure modes that the facilitated engagement is most vulnerable to in this phase. The drift toward technical discussion, in which the conversation's focus shifts from the operational implications of the week's developments to the technical specifications of the developments themselves, a shift that is interesting for the technically sophisticated members of the community, and operationally unhelpful for the practitioners whose primary concern is what the developments mean for their practice rather than how the developments work. And the drift toward speculative extrapolation, in which the conversation's focus shifts from the specific operational implications of the specific week's specific developments to the broad, generalized speculation about the long-term future of AI and its implications for human civilization that is intellectually stimulating and operationally approximate in a way that the briefing's purpose requires operational precision rather than civilizational approximation. The practitioner roundtable is the briefing's third phase, and it is the phase that most directly converts the cognitive synchronization the preceding phases have produced into the specific operational guidance that each community member can apply to their own sovereign practice in the week ahead. The practitioner roundtable is a specifically structured exchange in which community members who have made specific operational decisions in their sovereign practices during the preceding week that were directly informed by the AI development landscape, who have adopted a new tool, modified a production workflow, adjusted a client relationship, pivoted a content strategy, or made any other specific operational decision in direct response to a specific AI development, briefly describe the decision, its rationale, and its initial results for the collective assessment of the community's practitioners. This exchange serves several functions simultaneously. It grounds the Monday briefing's relatively abstract processing of the week's developments in the specific operational reality of what the community's practitioners are actually doing with their practices in response to the landscape's movement, providing the concrete cases that make the differential impact mapping and the trajectory reading immediately and specifically relevant to the practitioners who might otherwise receive those products as interesting but not immediately actionable. It generates the community's aggregate operational record of practice adaptations in response to AI development, the specific, longitudinal, community-maintained documentation of what specific adaptations have been made, by whom, in what specific conditions, with what specific initial results, that constitutes one of the most valuable knowledge assets the community produces for both its current members and the broader community of sovereign practitioners beyond the district's geographic boundaries. And it provides the specific accountability mechanism that the transition district's culture of operational honesty requires for the Monday briefing to maintain its integrity as a genuine cognitive synchronization session, rather than drifting into the comfortable but operationally thin culture of the technology appreciation gathering. The specific social pressure of the community's expectation that its practitioners will act on the Monday briefing's outputs in their actual practices, not merely find them intellectually interesting. The practitioner roundtable's format is deliberately brief at the individual level. Each practitioner's account of their operational decision and its results is allocated a specific time limit that prevents the roundtable from becoming the venue for extended individual presentations and maintains it as the venue for the rapid, high-density exchange of operational experience across the community's full range of practice domains. The brevity at the individual level is compensated by the depth of the collective engagement that the facilitator enables through the targeted follow-up questions that each practitioner's brief account generates. The questions that probe the specific operational conditions that made the decision appropriate, the specific results that the decision has produced in its initial implementation, and the specific uncertainties that the results have created about the decision's longer-term viability, that the community's collective experience might help to resolve. The specific facilitation discipline that the practitioner roundtable requires is the maintenance of the distinction between the operational account and the promotional account, between the practitioner's honest description of what they actually did and what it actually produced, including the aspects of the results that were less favorable than anticipated, and the practitioner's curated presentation of their operational decisions as examples of sophisticated strategic adaptation to the AI landscape. The Monday briefing's culture of operational honesty depends on the practitioner roundtable maintaining the honest account rather than the curated presentation, because the curated presentation produces the specific failure mode of the social proof spiral. The dynamic in which each practitioner's account of their operational decisions is calibrated to the standard of sophistication established by the preceding accounts rather than to the standard of honest operational description, producing a collective account of the community's practice adaptations that is impressively coherent in its narrative of sophisticated strategic adaptation and deeply misleading in its omission of the specific difficulties, the specific failures, and the specific unexpected consequences that honest operational accounts consistently produce, and that the community's genuine understanding of what is working in the landscape requires to be present. The Monday briefing's relationship to the rest of the week's metabolism is the relationship of orientation to action, the specific quality of shared cognitive context that makes the subsequent day's specific activities, the Tuesday publishing session's production work, the Wednesday myth-making night's speculative engagement with the post-AI future, the Thursday transition dinner's operational knowledge transfer, the Friday reality stress tests assessment of proposed life design's adequacy. To the landscape they will be navigating, all more coherent, more relevant, and more genuinely informed by the specific current conditions of the landscape that the sovereign practice must operate within than they would be in the absence of the Monday briefing's collective synchronization. The Tuesday publishing session whose content decisions are made in the context of the Monday briefing's collective assessment of the week's most significant AI developments in the content generation and distribution landscape is a publishing session whose content decisions are grounded in the specific current conditions of the publishing landscape rather than the conditions of the publishing landscape as they were 3 months ago when the practitioner last systematically engaged with the implications of AI development for their publishing practice. The Friday reality stress test, whose assessment of proposed life designs incorporates the Monday briefing's collective trajectory reading of the AI development landscape, is a stress test whose failure mode mapping is current rather than lagged, whose identification of the specific AI-related risks in the proposed design is based on the specific current trajectory of the relevant AI capabilities, rather than the trajectory of 6 months ago that the proposer's individual information diet may have provided as the most current available. The documentation and circulation function of the Monday briefing is the dimension of the session that extends its value beyond the community's immediate membership to the broader global community of sovereign practitioners whose interest in the transition district model this handbook is designed to attract. Each Monday briefing produces two specific documented outputs. The curated summary, which represents the community's collective assessment of the week's most operationally significant AI developments and which is publishable, in edited form, as the community's contribution to the global conversation about the AI development landscape's implications for sovereign practice, and the Practitioner Roundtable's aggregate account, which represents the community's collective record of practice. Adaptations in response to the week's developments and which is publishable, in edited and anonymized form, as the community's contribution to the operational knowledge base for sovereign practitioners navigating the AI development landscape. Both outputs serve the global reputation function that Part 1 of this handbook identified as the transition district's long-term strategic goal, the accumulation of documented, high-quality, genuinely operationally useful contributions to the global discourse about the post-institutional transition that establishes the community's credibility as a serious practitioner community rather than a gathering of aspiring practitioners, and that generates the specific quality of global recognition. That the transition district's first-mover advantage in the post-corporate transition geography landscape requires to be established and maintained. The specific quality of the Monday briefing's published outputs is the most important determinant of the quality of the global recognition they generate, and the quality of the published outputs is directly dependent on the quality of the Monday briefing's internal process. The honesty of the operational accounts, the genuine sophistication of the collective intelligence's engagement with the week's developments, the specific operational accuracy of the differential impact mapping and the trajectory reading and the operational translation. This dependency creates the specific alignment between the community's internal culture and its external reputation that the transition district's governing framework is designed to produce at every level. The community that maintains the highest quality of its internal culture produces the highest quality of its external outputs, and the highest quality of its external outputs generates the global recognition that attracts the highest quality of subsequent arrivals, whose contributions to the community's internal culture raise the quality of the internal culture further, in the specific virtuous cycle that distinguishes the genuinely self-sustaining community from the community that must continuously recruit external resources to maintain the quality of its culture against the internal pressures that any community's daily operation generates. The Monday briefing's most subtle and most important contribution to the community's culture is not any of the specific outputs it produces. Not the differential impact mapping or the trajectory reading or the operational translation or the documented practitioner roundtable or the publishable curated summary. It is the specific quality of collective attention to the accelerating landscape that the briefing's consistent weekly practice develops in the community's membership, the specific quality of engaged, honest, operationally focused, genuinely intelligent collective attention to the most consequential technological development in the history of the professional world, practiced consistently week after week in the company of genuine peers whose different perspectives and different operational experiences make the collective attention more accurate and more useful than any individual's attention to the same landscape could be. This quality of collective attention is what genuine cognitive synchronization means. Not the state of all community members having read the same articles and arrived at the same conclusions, which is mere information broadcasting, but the state of all community members having engaged with the same information set through their genuinely different cognitive frameworks and genuinely different operational perspectives and arrived at a collective understanding of the landscape that is more complete, more accurate, and more operationally useful than any individual's understanding, and that is continuously updated through the consistent weekly practice of the engagement rather than decaying between the occasional engagements that the individual practitioner's solo information diet permits. The Monday briefing is therefore not merely the first item in the week's programmatic schedule. It is the community's primary instrument of collective intelligence, the specific practice through which the community maintains, week after week and generation of membership after generation of membership, the specific quality of genuine operational engagement with the world as it is currently developing that is the most fundamental requirement of the sovereign practice that the transition district is designed to produce. The community that does not maintain this engagement is a community that is building its sovereign practices for a landscape that is no longer the landscape, building for the conditions of 6 months ago or a year ago or 2 years ago, the last time the practitioner's individual information diets provided a systematic update on the landscape's current state. while the landscape continues to accelerate away from the conditions on which the practices were designed. The sovereign practice built on a stale landscape assessment is not sovereign. It is institutionally independent but environmentally lagged, which is a form of the same dependency on external provision of context that institutional employment produced, merely relocated from the institution's provision of organizational context to the practitioner's accumulated but unrefreshed personal model of the technological environment. Genuine sovereignty requires genuine engagement with the current conditions of the landscape within which the practice operates. The Monday briefing is the practice of that engagement, conducted collectively because the collective engagement is more accurate and more useful than any individual solo engagement, and conducted weekly because the landscape is accelerating at a pace that makes the weekly cadence the minimum adequate frequency for maintaining genuine synchronization rather than the appearance of synchronization that monthly or quarterly engagement produces. The week begins with the briefing because the briefing is how the community begins the week genuinely, not with the comfort of the established practice or the excitement of the creative session or the warmth of the community gathering, but with the specific honest, disciplined, collectively intelligent engagement with the world as it is currently developing that sovereign practice in the conditions of the civilizational transition requires as its most foundational and most non-negotiable. Weekly discipline. The landscape is accelerating. The community is paying attention. That attention, practiced week after week with the honesty and the operational specificity and the genuine peer intelligence that the Monday briefings culture is designed to maintain, is the specific quality of collective cognitive sovereignty that no institutional framework ever provided and that the Transition District's community is building one Monday at a time, as the foundational practice of the civilization it is in the process of prototyping. Part 4. The weekly METABOLISM Chapter 19, Tuesday. The sovereign publishing infrastructure. The distinction between a writing workshop and a sovereign publishing session is the distinction between a practice space and a production environment, and the distinction matters in ways that go considerably deeper than the obvious difference in the formality of the outputs produced. The writing workshop is organized around the development of the writer's craft, the improvement of the writing through the cycle of production, critique, revision, and renewed production that the workshop format enables, with the improvement of the craft as the primary purpose and the production of publishable work as a secondary benefit that may or may not result from the craft's development at any given stage. The writing workshop's success is measured by the quality of the feedback and the quality of the development it produces in the writers who participate. The sovereign publishing session is organized around the production of publishable work, actual publications in actual forms, for actual audiences, generating actual responses that constitute actual operational feedback on the publication's quality and relevance and the practitioner's publishing practice's current state of development. The sovereign publishing session's success is measured by the actual outputs produced and the actual responses those outputs generate from the actual audiences they reach. The craft development is not incidental to this purpose. The sovereign publisher whose craft is not developing is a sovereign publisher whose practice is stagnating in ways that will eventually compromise its sustainability, but it is not the organizing purpose. The organizing purpose is production, and the craft development is the specific form of development that sustained production in a community of genuine peers with genuine standards consistently generates as a byproduct of the production's honest collective assessment. This distinction has several direct implications for the Tuesday session's design that separate it from the writing workshop format that the session might otherwise resemble in its surface features. The first implication is the output requirement, the specific norm that the sovereign publishing session maintains as its primary cultural standard, which is that each session produces actual publishable outputs rather than drafts toward eventual outputs or discussions of the publishing practice rather than the practice of publishing itself. The output requirement is not a performance metric or a productivity quota. It is a cultural norm that the session's design maintains through the specific structure of the session's time and the specific quality of the community's response to what is produced, which is the response of an audience that has actually read or engaged with the actual output rather than the response of a workshop group that has assessed the potential of a draft toward an eventual output. The community's response to a published essay is different from the community's response to a draft of a potential essay in the specific way that operational feedback is different from craft feedback. It addresses the actual reception of the actual publication by an actual audience rather than the theoretical reception of a hypothetical publication by a hypothetical audience, and it therefore provides the specific quality of information that the sovereign publisher most needs, not whether the Writing is good in the abstract terms of craft assessment, but whether the writing is working in the specific operational sense of reaching the specific audience the publisher is trying to reach and producing the specific response in that audience that the publisher's practice requires to sustain itself. The second implication is the infrastructure requirement, the specific norm that the Tuesday session maintains regarding the publishing infrastructure that each participating practitioner is responsible for developing and maintaining as an element of their sovereign practice, rather than as a technical prerequisite to the session's operation. The sovereign publisher is not a writer who publishes. Each of these elements constitutes a component of the sovereign publishing infrastructure, and the Tuesday session's design must support the development of all of them rather than only the writing component that the writing workshop format would address. Each of these elements constitutes a component of the sovereign publishing infrastructure, and the Tuesday session's design must support the development of all of them rather than only the writing component that the writing workshop format would address. The third implication is the audience presence requirement, the specific norm that the Tuesday session maintains regarding the actual presence, in the session's collective assessment of each practitioner's outputs, of the practitioner's actual audience rather than the proxy audience of the workshop group. This implication is the most technically challenging of the three, because the actual audience of a sovereign publisher is not present in the room on Tuesday morning. They are distributed across the specific communities of interest, the specific professional domains, the specific geographic and cultural contexts that the publisher's practice addresses, and they are engaging with the publication at various times and in various ways that are not synchronized with the Tuesday session's collective assessment. The requirement is therefore not that the actual audience be physically present, but that the actual audience's actual responses be present, that the Tuesday session's collective assessment of each practitioner's recent publications incorporates the actual response data that the actual audience has generated in the period since the previous Tuesday session, in the form of subscription growth or contraction, open rates and click rates and response rates, direct responses from readers, social media engagement, the specific quality of the responses that the publication is generating in the specific communities it is reaching. This actual audience response data is the primary material for the Tuesday session's operational assessment of each practitioner's publishing practice, and its presence in the session is what distinguishes the session's collective intelligence from the writing workshop's craft assessment, makes it genuinely operational rather than merely literary. The Tuesday session structure is organized around three primary activities: the production sprint, the publication review, and the infrastructure workshop. Each activity serves a specific function in the development of the sovereign publishing practice, and the session's time allocation between the three reflects the specific balance between the short-term production function and the medium-term infrastructure development function and the long-term practice assessment function that a genuinely sustainable sovereign publishing practice requires. The production sprint is the session's opening activity, and it is the element that most directly embodies the output requirement that distinguishes the session from the writing workshop format. The production sprint is a defined period of focused, uninterrupted writing, the production of actual content for actual publication, conducted in the specific social conditions of the community's shared production environment, which provides the specific combination of ambient productivity and collective accountability that makes the production sprint more consistently productive than solo writing sessions for most practitioners at most stages of their publishing practice's development. The ambient productivity of the shared production environment is the specific quality of the physical and social conditions of the Tuesday session that makes the individual practitioner's production easier and more consistent than their solo production. Not through any external pressure or any explicit accountability mechanism, but through the specific cognitive and motivational effect of being in physical proximity with other people who are also engaged in the same activity of focused production, whose engagement with their own production creates the ambient social signal of productive engagement that the individual practitioner's motivation responds to in the same way that it responds to any reliable social signal of the appropriateness and the value of the activity being performed. The ambient productivity of the shared production environment is one of the most operationally significant contributions that the transition district's territorial commitment and the Tuesday session's physical co-presence make to the sovereign publisher's practice, and one of the most directly undermined by the solo digital nomad lifestyle substitution of virtual community for physical community, because the ambient productivity of the shared production environment is a product of physical co-presence that cannot be replicated through the video call or the shared virtual workspace, however sophisticated the technology through which those substitutes are implemented. The collective accountability of the Tuesday session's production sprint is the specific quality of the social expectation that the session's culture maintains. The expectation that each practitioner will arrive at the session with a specific production intention for the sprint period, will engage in the sprint's focused production throughout its duration, and will have an actual output to bring to the session's subsequent publication review. This expectation is not enforced through any explicit accountability mechanism. The sovereign publisher's sovereignty includes the sovereignty to determine what they produce and when, and any external enforcement of production would compromise the sovereignty that the publishing practice is designed to express. It is maintained through the ambient quality of the session's culture, through the community's collective modeling of the specific discipline of consistent production that the initiated publishing practitioners demonstrate through their own engagement with the sprint, and through the specific social condition of the publication review's collective assessment, which creates the specific quality of community-generated accountability for the production sprint's outputs that the solo publishing session cannot generate because no community is present to assess the outputs. The production sprint's duration is calibrated to the specific cognitive requirements of the focused writing state, long enough to allow the practitioner to reach and sustain the specific quality of deep engagement with the writing that produces the highest quality outputs, and short enough to be consistently achievable without the motivational and cognitive depletion that extended writing sessions without breaks produce in most practitioners. The specific duration that the transition district's Tuesday session maintains is determined through the community's collective operational experience of what duration most consistently produces both the highest quality outputs and the most consistent practitioner engagement across the full range of practitioners' specific writing capacities and practice stages, and it is revisited periodically through the community's governance processes as the community's membership and its collective operational knowledge develop. The publication review is the session's central activity, and it is the activity that most directly distinguishes the Tuesday session from any solo publishing practice or any writing workshop alternative. The publication review is the specific process through which each practitioner's recent publications, the actual outputs produced in the preceding week and published to the practitioner's actual audience, are brought to the community's collective assessment in the specific form that makes the assessment genuinely useful rather than merely evaluative. The genuinely useful assessment is the assessment that addresses the three dimensions of the publication's operational performance that the practitioner most needs honest collective intelligence about: whether the publication is doing what it was designed to do for the specific audience it was designed for, whether the specific elements of the publication's content and form and distribution are contributing to or detracting from the publishing practice's long-term development in the specific directions the practice's sustainability requires, and whether the specific audience response data the publication has generated reveals anything about the community, the market, or the broader landscape that the practitioner's individual perspective on their own publication would be likely to miss. The publication review's format is the element of the Tuesday session's design that is most consistently corrupted in the direction of the writing workshop format by the natural social dynamics of a community that includes both practitioners at early stages of their publishing practice, for whom the craft feedback of the workshop format is genuinely valuable and the operational feedback of the publication review is occasionally discouraging in its specificity, and practitioners at advanced stages, for whom the operational feedback is the primary value of the review and the craft feedback is occasionally condescending in its focus on dimensions of the publication that the experienced practitioner has already mastered. The maintenance of the publication review's operational format against the drift toward the workshop format is one of the primary facilitation challenges of the Tuesday session, and it requires the specific cultural discipline of maintaining the community's collective norm that the review's purpose is operational assessment rather than craft assessment, a norm that must be actively maintained rather than passively assumed, because the social dynamics of a community with mixed levels of publishing experience will consistently produce the workshop format's warmer and less operationally demanding culture unless the community's initiated practitioners actively model the operational format through their own engagement with the review. The specific protocol that the Tuesday session's publication review follows is organized around the practitioner's brief account of the publication's production context, the publication's audience response data, and the practitioner's own assessment of the publication's performance relative to the practice's goals, followed by the community's collective response in the specific sequence that the protocol maintains. The community's response begins with the factual engagement. The community members who have actually engaged with the publication describe their actual response to it in the specific terms of the publication's operational purpose rather than the generic terms of their aesthetic appreciation, addressing the specific question of whether the publication did what it was designed to do for the specific reader it was designed to serve. The factual engagement is followed by the pattern identification, the community's collective assessment of whether the specific publication reveals any pattern in the practitioner's publishing practice that the practitioner's individual perspective on their own output might not have identified, whether positive, indicating a specific dimension of the practice that is consistently working well and that the practitioner might deliberately amplify, or negative, indicating a specific failure mode that is beginning to develop and that the practitioner's awareness of would allow them to address before it becomes entrenched. The pattern identification is followed by the operational recommendation, the community's collective generation of specific, actionable guidance for the practitioner's next publication decision, based on the factual engagement and the pattern identification, in the specific format of recommendations that the practitioner can immediately apply to the next cycle of the production and publication process. The infrastructure workshop is the session's third activity, and it is the activity that addresses the medium and long-term development of the sovereign publishing practice's infrastructure rather than the immediate production and review of specific publications. The infrastructure workshop is organized around the specific infrastructure challenge that each week's community discussion identifies as most immediately relevant to the community's collective publishing development. The challenge that is most broadly shared across the community's publishing practitioners, and that the community's collective intelligence is most positioned to address productively in the specific conditions of the current week's programmatic context. Infrastructure workshop topics vary with the community's current collective development stage and its current collective challenges, but they are organized around the primary infrastructure components that every sovereign publishing practice requires: platform selection and management, audience development strategy, monetization architecture, distribution network development, editorial identity construction, multilingual publishing practice, AI-assisted production workflow integration, and the specific economic and contractual dimensions of the independent publishing relationship that the institutional publishing relationship previously managed on the practitioner's behalf. The multilingual publishing dimension of the infrastructure workshop is the element most specific to the transition district's specific geographic and cultural context, and most directly relevant to the global recognition objective that the transition district strategy is aimed at. The Tulum Corridor's cultural position at the intersection of the Spanish-speaking Latin American world, the English-speaking global professional world, and the French and Arabic and other language communities that the next migration's diverse composition brings to the district creates a specific opportunity for the community's sovereign publishing practices to develop the multilingual publishing capabilities that the global audience the transition district is seeking to reach requires. The multilingual publishing infrastructure workshop addresses the specific operational challenges of maintaining a sovereign publishing practice across multiple languages simultaneously, the specific challenges of translation quality, of audience development in different language communities, of monetization architecture across different linguistic markets, of the specific AI tools that the current state of machine translation and AI-assisted multilingual content adaptation makes available for the sovereign publisher's use, and of the specific editorial standards that a multilingual publication must maintain to be genuinely credible in each of the language communities it addresses rather than merely intelligible in a form that confirms the non-native speaker's secondary status in the publication's intended audience hierarchy. The NFP, the non-fungible publication, is the Tuesday session's most distinctive and most philosophically significant output, and it deserves specific treatment in the context of the infrastructure workshop scope because it represents the transition district's most direct contribution to the question of what sovereign publishing means in the specific conditions of a digital publishing landscape characterized by platform volatility, algorithmic opacity, and the continuous erosion of the durable relationship between a publication and its audience that the digital distribution model consistently produces in favor of the transient relationship between a piece of content and the algorithmic amplification that the platform selectively provides. The NFP is the physical publication, the printed, designed, materially produced document that carries the sovereign publisher's work in a form that is not dependent on any platform's continued operation, any algorithm's continued favor, or any digital distribution network's continued accessibility. It is not merely a printed version of the digital publication, it is a publication specifically designed for physical production, with the specific editorial, visual, and material properties that the physical form enables and that the digital form consistently suppresses in the service of the algorithmic optimization that the digital distribution model requires. The NFP's role in the sovereign publishing practice is the role of the durable record, the specific physical manifestation of the intellectual and creative work that the practitioner's sovereign practice produces, in a form that outlasts any platform, any algorithm, any digital distribution network, and any of the specific technical infrastructures on which the digital publishing practice depends. The Tuesday session's infrastructure workshop includes the specific skills and the specific practices of NFP production, the design practices, the printing practices, the distribution practices, and the specific editorial practices of writing for physical publication rather than digital publication, as a core element of the sovereign publishing infrastructure that the community's practitioners are developing, not as a nostalgic gesture toward the pre-digital publishing world but as a specific strategic practice in response to the specific operational condition of the digital publishing landscape, which is the condition of a distribution infrastructure that is simultaneously more accessible than any previous distribution infrastructure and more fragile than any previous distribution infrastructure, in the specific sense that the accessibility is contingent on the platform's continued operation and the algorithm's continued favor in a way that the physical distribution infrastructure's accessibility is not. The AI-assisted production workflow is the other dimension of the Tuesday session's infrastructure workshop that requires specific treatment, because it is the dimension that is most rapidly evolving in the specific conditions of the current AI development landscape, and that therefore requires the most consistent updating through the Monday briefing's trajectory reading and the Tuesday session's own collective intelligence about the current state of AI tools for the sovereign publishers. Specific production tasks. The AI-assisted production workflow encompasses the specific tools and practices through which the sovereign publisher uses the current generation of AI capabilities: language model assistance for drafting, editing, and translation, AI-assisted research and synthesis, AI-generated visual content for publication design, AI-assisted audience analysis and distribution optimization, in ways that enhance the publishing practice's productivity and quality without compromising the specific qualities of genuine human intelligence and genuine human perspective that make the sovereign publisher's work valuable to the specific audience it serves. The workshop addresses the specific operational challenge of this balance, the challenge of identifying the specific points in the publication production process at which AI assistance genuinely enhances the output's quality and the practice's sustainability, and the specific points at which AI assistance compromises the output's authenticity and the practice's distinctive value, in ways that are specific to the practitioner's specific publishing domain and specific enough to be immediately applicable to the practitioner's current production practice rather than generic enough to apply to any publishing practice and therefore applicable to none in particular. The Tuesday session's relationship to the rest of the week's metabolism is the relationship of production to reflection, the specific quality of actual creative and intellectual output that gives the week's subsequent activities their concrete material to engage with. The Wednesday myth-making night's speculative narrative production is informed and enriched by the Tuesday session's sovereign publishing practice, because the practitioners who are consistently producing for actual audiences are the practitioners whose speculative narratives are grounded in the specific operational knowledge of what resonates with the specific communities the practitioner's publishing has developed genuine relationships with. The Friday reality stress tests assessment of proposed publishing practices is made more accurate and more operationally honest by the Tuesday session's collective intelligence about the specific current conditions of the sovereign publishing landscape, the specific challenges of audience development, the specific economics of the independent publishing model, the specific failure modes that the session's publication reviews have identified in the community's actual publishing practices. The Monday briefing's trajectory reading of the AI development landscape is made immediately and specifically relevant to each practitioner's publishing practice by the Tuesday session's infrastructure workshop's translation of the trajectory reading into the specific production workflow and distribution strategy decisions that the practitioner's current publishing practice requires. The Tuesday session's most important contribution to the transition district's global recognition strategy is not any individual publication that any individual practitioner produces in its context, though individual publications of genuine quality and genuine relevance are the primary vehicles through which the transition district's governing vocabulary reaches the global audience of transitioning professionals that the strategy is seeking to attract. It is the specific quality of the sovereign publishing culture that the Tuesday session's consistent practice develops in the community's membership, the specific commitment to actual output, to operational honesty about the output's actual performance, to genuine collective intelligence about the specific current conditions of the sovereign publishing landscape, and to the specific infrastructure development that makes each practitioner's publishing practice more capable, more sustainable, and more genuinely useful to the specific audiences it is serving. This culture, the culture of serious, disciplined, genuinely honest sovereign publishing practice, is the transition district's most visible and most globally accessible signature. The specific quality of the community's published outputs that makes the transition district's claim to be a serious practitioner community rather than an aspiring one visible, demonstrable, and credible to the global audience that the governing vocabulary is designed to reach and the global recognition is designed to establish. The sovereign publisher does not merely write. The sovereign publisher produces, consistently, honestly, with genuine attention to the actual audience's actual response, within the specific infrastructure that the Tuesday session's collective practice is continuously developing and continuously refining. The Tuesday session is where the production happens, where the honest assessment of the production's operational performance occurs, and where the infrastructure that makes the production sustainable and the assessment meaningful is built, week by week and practitioner by practitioner, into the specific sovereign publishing culture that is the transition district's most legible and most globally visible contribution to the post-institutional civilization it is in the process of prototyping. Part 4. The weekly METABOLISM Chapter 20. Wednesday. The Myth Engine. The case for a dedicated weekly session of speculative fiction, world-building, and parallel civilization narrative production in the context of a community organized around the practical challenges of post-institutional professional transition is not immediately obvious, and the resistance to making the case. The temptation to treat Wednesday night as the week's cultural amenity, the pleasant creative break from the serious operational work of the Monday briefing and the Tuesday publishing session and the Friday reality stress test, is precisely the temptation that this chapter must resist most firmly, because the temptation, if yielded to, produces a misunderstanding of what Wednesday night is, for that corrupts the entire function the session is designed to perform. Wednesday night is not a break from the serious work. It is one of the most serious activities the community undertakes, and its seriousness is of a specific kind that the operational vocabulary of the transition district's other sessions is not designed to address, and that the creative vocabulary of the literary and artistic traditions it draws on does not fully capture either. It is the seriousness of civilizational necessity, the recognition, grounded in the anthropological record of every human community that has ever built something durable, that myth is not the decoration of a civilization's practical work but one of its primary structural components, and that the community which neglects its myth production is the community whose practical work is building on a foundation that will not hold across the duration that genuine civilizational ambition requires. The anthropological record is unambiguous on this point, and it is worth dwelling on briefly before the operational specifics of the Wednesday session are described, because the anthropological grounding is what gives the operational specifics their rationale, and what prevents the session from drifting into the cultural amenity function that its pleasant creative atmosphere might otherwise encourage. Every human community that has achieved genuine cultural durability, that has sustained a coherent identity and a compelling sense of collective purpose across multiple generations of membership, across the inevitable changes of material circumstance and demographic composition and external political and economic pressure that any sustained community encounters, has done so primarily through the continuous production, maintenance, and transmission of a shared mythology. A body of stories, images, characters, situations, and governing narratives that give the community's members a shared imaginative framework within which to understand who they are, where they came from, what they are for, and what they are moving toward. This mythology is not, in the anthropological sense, a collection of false beliefs that the community maintains in preference to true ones. It is a specific kind of narrative infrastructure that performs functions that no other kind of narrative infrastructure performs, that makes available to the community's members a specific quality of shared imaginative engagement with the community's own identity and purpose that factual accounts, strategic documents, and operational frameworks cannot provide, because those modes of communication address the rational faculty rather than the imaginative one, and the imaginative faculty is the faculty through which human beings most deeply invest in the communities and the purposes they are asked to give their genuine commitment to. The transition district's governing vocabulary, the specific conceptual framework this handbook has been developing across its preceding chapters, is the intellectual infrastructure of the community's identity. It addresses the rational faculty with precision and with operational rigor, and it is essential for the reasons that the preceding chapters have established in detail. But it is not sufficient because the rational faculty's commitment to a community and a purpose is always provisional, always subject to revision in the face of new evidence or changed circumstances or the simple erosion of enthusiasm that sustained exposure to even the most compelling rational argument produces over time. The imaginative faculty's commitment is of a different character. It is the commitment that is generated not by the accumulation of compelling arguments but by the accumulation of compelling images, stories, characters, and situations that make the community's identity and purpose feel like something the community member inhabits rather than something they have been convinced of. The mythology is what makes the transition district feel like a civilization being built rather than a program being administered, what makes the sovereign publishing practice feel like an act of territorial capture rather than a content marketing strategy. What makes the Friday reality stress test feel like the council of practitioners in a community that matters rather than a feedback session in a professional development program. The mythology is the imaginative dimension of everything that the rational vocabulary has already established in the intellectual dimension, and without the mythology, the rational vocabulary is the blueprint of a building that no one particularly wants to live in. The Wednesday session is where the mythology is produced, not commemorated, not celebrated, not studied, but actively and continuously produced by the community's members in genuine collaborative creative engagement, in the forms of speculative fiction, world-building, parallel civilization narrative, and AI-human collaborative storytelling that are the specific mythological production modes most appropriate to the specific character of the transition district's governing mythology and the specific capabilities of the community's membership. The session is called the Myth Engine because it is not a passive encounter with existing mythology, but an active production machine for new mythology. The community's primary instrument for the continuous generation of the shared imaginative framework that the governing vocabulary's intellectual architecture requires the imagination to inhabit in order to become genuinely constitutive of the community's identity rather than merely descriptive of its aspirations. The specific mythological register that the Wednesday session operates in is the speculative rather than the retrospective. It produces myths about possible futures rather than authoritative accounts of authoritative pasts, which is the appropriate mythological register for a community that is explicitly in the business of prototyping a civilization that does not yet fully exist rather than maintaining a civilization that was established in a completed and authoritative founding moment. The retrospective mythological register, the myth that derives its authority from its account of what actually happened in the community's founding, is appropriate for communities whose cultural authority depends on the authenticity of their continuity with an established tradition. The transition district's cultural authority depends on a different quality, the authenticity of its engagement with the specific historical moment of civilizational transition it is navigating, and the coherence and the creativity of its imaginative engagement with the possible futures that the transition might produce. The speculative mythological register is the appropriate one for this kind of cultural authority, because it allows the community's mythology to be genuinely responsive to the specific current conditions of the civilizational transition, to evolve as the transition evolves, to incorporate the specific developments of the Monday briefing's trajectory reading into the Wednesday session's speculative imaginative engagement, to produce myths that are genuinely about the specific future that the specific current trajectory of the AI development landscape and the specific current conditions of the post-institutional professional world are making possible rather than about a generic post-institutional future that bears no specific relationship to the specific current conditions. The super-Earth universe, the shared speculative world that the transition district's community is in the process of building as the primary container for the Wednesday session's mythological production, is the specific imaginative framework within which the community's speculative fiction and world-building and parallel civilization narrative production occurs. The super-Earth universe is not a single author's creation that the community is contributing to. It is a genuinely collaborative world-building project, in which the community's members collectively determine the universe's governing principles, its primary characters and factions and territories, its specific historical events and their consequences, and its specific relationship to the current conditions of the civilizational transition that the community is navigating. The collaborative determination of the universe's governing principles is the most important and most philosophically significant aspect of the world-building project. because the governing principles of the speculative universe encode the community's collective imagination of what the civilizational transition might produce, what the post-institutional world might look like at its best, what its specific failure modes might be, what the specific human types and the specific social arrangements, and the specific cultural forms that the transition might generate in its different possible trajectories might be, and what the specific conditions of possibility for the kinds of sovereign practice and territorial community and intellectual sovereignty that the transition district's governing vocabulary proposes as the destination of the current transition might look like in the specific social and technological conditions that the speculative universe imagines as the current trajectory's possible continuation. The super-Earth universe's relationship to the transition district's governing vocabulary is the relationship of the imaginative embodiment to the intellectual framework. The universe is the place where the governing vocabulary's abstract concepts acquire specific faces, specific histories, specific emotional textures, and the specific narrative momentum that makes the concepts feel like the description of a real world rather than the prescription of a desired one. The concept of operational sovereignty, articulated in Chapter 16 of this handbook with the operational precision that the intellectual framework requires, acquires in the super-Earth universe the specific embodied reality of the sovereign practitioners who inhabit the universe, their specific practices, their specific failures, their specific moments of genuine achievement, their specific relationships to the specific territories and the specific communities and the specific technological conditions of the universe's imagined world. The concept of the initiator, articulated in the handbook's treatment of the architecture of arrival with the taxonomic precision that the intellectual framework requires, acquires in the super-Earth universe the specific narrative complexity of the initiated characters who move through the universe, their specific histories of how they became initiated, the specific cost of their knowledge, the specific quality of their relationships with the uninitiated characters they encounter, the specific ways in which the knowledge transfer between them occurs and fails and partially succeeds and generates the specific forward momentum of the narrative that makes the concept of the initiator not merely intellectually compelling but imaginatively inhabited. The Wednesday session structure is organized around three primary activities: the open archive engagement, the production session, and the showcase and response. Each activity serves a specific function in the ongoing development of the super-Earth universe and the community's mythological production more broadly, and the session's time allocation reflects the specific balance between the reception of existing contributions to the universe and the production of new ones, and the collective engagement with the outputs that gives the production its community context and its civilizational consequence. The open archive engagement is the session's opening activity, and it is the activity through which the community's members engage with the super-Earth universe's existing contributions, the stories, the essays, the world-building documents, the character studies, the scenario analyses, the visual and audio productions that the community's members have contributed to the shared archive in the period since the previous Wednesday session. The open archive engagement is not a formal review of contributions. It is a genuine creative engagement with the archive's current state, organized by the specific question of what the archive's most recent contributions reveal about the universe's current imaginative direction and what that direction suggests about the specific production the current session's participants might most usefully contribute. The open archive engagement is therefore simultaneously a reception of existing mythology and a preparation for new production, and its effective facilitation requires the specific quality of engaged, genuinely curious attention to the archive's contents that the initiated practitioner's imaginative investment in the universe's development naturally produces, and that the uninitiated arrival's developing relationship to the universe gradually cultivates through the consistent weekly encounter with the archive's evolving contents. The production session is the Wednesday night's central activity, and it is the activity through which the community's members contribute new material to the super-Earth universe's ongoing development. The production session is organized around the specific production mode that each week's session identifies as most generative for the universe's current developmental needs. The mode in which the specific current state of the universe's world building and the specific current conditions of the civilizational transition the community is navigating most productively intersect. The primary production modes that the Wednesday session cycles through are the narrative production mode, the world building mode, the character development mode, the scenario analysis mode, and the AI-human collaborative production mode, and each mode serves a different function in the universe's ongoing development. The narrative production mode is the mode in which the community's members produce actual speculative fiction, actual stories, in the specific sense of narratives with characters and situations and forward momentum and the specific quality of imaginative engagement that the story form uniquely provides. The narrative production mode is the most immediately accessible of the production modes for the community's members with strong literary capabilities, and the most demanding for those whose creative strengths lie in other directions, and the Wednesday session's design must accommodate this range by maintaining the narrative production mode as one mode among several, rather than as the default mode that the session always operates in regardless of the community's current composition and current creative strengths. The stories produced in the narrative production mode are the Super-Earth universe's primary mythological material, the specific narrative embodiments of the universe's governing principles, and the specific imaginative situations through which the universe's characters and factions and territories acquire the narrative reality that makes them genuinely inhabitable by the community's imagination rather than merely conceptually sketched. The world-building mode is the mode in which the community's members contribute to the Super-Earth universe's structural development, the specific work of determining and refining the universe's governing physical and social and technological and cultural principles, the specific histories and geographies and political arrangements and economic systems that constitute the universe's background reality, and the specific relationships between the universe's different factions and territories and the specific tensions and alliances and conflicts that give the universe its narrative dynamic. The world-building mode is the mode in which the community's most intellectually sophisticated members, the researchers and the theorists and the systems thinkers whose creative strengths lie in conceptual architecture rather than narrative construction, make their most direct and most valuable contributions to the universe's development, and it is the mode that most directly translates the governing vocabulary's intellectual framework into the universe's imaginative architecture. The world-building mode's outputs are the Super-Earth universe's primary intellectual material, the specific conceptual structures that give the universe's narrative content its coherence and its depth and its specific relationship to the governing vocabulary that the transition district's intellectual framework has established. The character development mode is the mode in which the community's members develop the Super-Earth universe's primary characters, the specific individuals whose stories constitute the universe's primary narrative content and whose specific psychological and social and professional reality gives the universe's abstract governing principles their emotional and imaginative embodiment. Character development is the mode through which the transition district's governing vocabulary most directly acquires its human face, the specific face of the initiated practitioner navigating the specific challenges of sovereign practice in the universe's imagined conditions, the specific face of the uninitiated arrival in the universe's imagined transition infrastructure encountering the specific challenges of the conversion arc, the specific face of the property stakeholder in the universe's imagined version of the Aldea Zama scenario encountering the specific narrative of the second phase transition's early development. The characters are the myth's primary vehicles of human identification, the specific human beings in whom the community's members recognize dimensions of their own experience and their own aspirations, and through whom the governing vocabulary's abstract concepts acquire the specific emotional reality that makes them genuinely motivating rather than merely intellectually compelling. The scenario analysis mode is the mode in which the community's members engage in the specific practice of speculative scenario development, the systematic exploration of how the specific current trajectory of the AI development landscape and the specific current conditions of the post-institutional professional world might develop in the Super-Earth universe's imagined continuation of the current trajectory. The scenario analysis mode is the Wednesday session's most direct connection to the Monday briefing's trajectory reading, the mode in which the Monday briefing's collective intelligence about the current landscape's direction is translated into the specific imaginative scenarios that give the direction its narrative embodiment and its specific human implications. The scenario analysis mode produces the Super-Earth universe's primary connection to the community's current operational reality, the specific imaginative explorations of what the current trajectory, continued through the specific historical developments that the Monday briefing's trajectory reading identifies as the most plausible continuation of the current direction, might produce in terms of the specific social arrangements and the specific human experiences and the specific operational challenges and opportunities that the community's sovereign practitioners might encounter in the imagined continuation. The AI-human collaborative production mode is the most technically distinctive of the Wednesday session's production modes. And it is the mode that most directly embodies the specific relationship between the community's sovereign practitioners and the AI development landscape that the transition district's governing vocabulary proposes as one of the primary characteristics of the post-institutional civilization the community is prototyping. The AI-human collaborative production mode is the specific practice of using the current generation of AI creative capabilities, the language models, the image generation systems, the audio production tools, the narrative generation assistants, as genuine collaborative partners in the production of the Wednesday session's creative outputs, rather than as productivity tools that substitute human creative effort with automated generation or as reference tools that supplement human creative effort with automated information retrieval. The genuine collaborative use of AI in creative production is a specific practice that requires the specific development of the practitioner's understanding of what AI creative capabilities are genuinely good at and what they are genuinely not good at, how to prompt and guide AI creative generation in directions that the human practitioner's creative vision requires rather than the directions that the AI's training distribution makes it most likely to produce without specific guidance, and how to assess and curate and refine and integrate AI-generated creative material with the human practitioner's own creative intelligence in ways that produce outputs of genuine quality that are neither fully human nor fully automated but specifically collaborative in the sense that the collaboration produces something neither party could produce alone. The showcase and response is the Wednesday session's closing activity, and it is the activity that gives the production session's individual and small group outputs their community context and their civilizational consequence. The showcase is not a formal exhibition of completed works. It is the specific practice of making the session's production outputs available to the community's collective engagement in the specific forms that the different production modes' outputs most naturally take. The story excerpt read aloud or projected for the community's encounter, the world-building document's key elements summarized and opened for collective response. The character studies' primary moments shared in the form most likely to generate the community's genuine imaginative engagement. The scenario analysis's key findings and key uncertainties, presented in the form that most directly invites the community's collective intelligence to engage with the specific open questions the analysis has identified. The AI-human collaborative outputs specific qualities of AI contribution and human contribution distinguished and made available for the community's assessment of the collaboration's specific quality and the specific lessons for future collaborative practice that the session's collaboration has generated. The response component of the showcase is the most important element of the Wednesday session's cultural value, and it is the element that distinguishes the session's collective mythological production from the solo speculative fiction practice that any community member could pursue independently. The community's genuine response to the session's productions, the specific imaginative engagement, the specific questions and the specific associations and the specific implications that the productions generate in the community's members, is the mythological resonance test that gives the community's mythological production its cultural authority and its civilizational consequence. The production that generates genuine resonance in the community, that produces the specific quality of imaginative engagement in which the community members recognize something true about the conditions they are navigating or the future they are building toward or the specific human experiences that the governing vocabulary has been describing in abstract terms, is the production that has succeeded as mythology rather than merely as fiction, that has contributed to the community's shared imaginative framework rather than merely to the community's archive of competently executed creative outputs. The response is what reveals whether the resonance has occurred, and the response's specific quality, the specific imaginative extensions and the specific personal associations and the specific operational implications that the community members identify in response to the production, is itself the primary material for the next cycle of production. The specific imaginative data that tells the Wednesday session's participants where the Super-Earth universe's most generative current direction is. The Super-Earth universe's external presence, its publication in the community's sovereign publishing ecosystem, its distribution to the global communities of speculative fiction readers and post-institutional transition practitioners and AI development observers that the community's publishing reach extends into, is the Wednesday session's primary contribution to the transition district's global recognition strategy. The universe's published outputs are the community's most distinctive and most culturally irreducible contribution to the global discourse about the post-corporate civilization transition, because they are the specific creative and imaginative outputs that no other community is producing and that no other community could produce, because no other community is simultaneously embedded in the specific operational reality of the post-institutional transition and committed to the specific practice. of speculative mythological production that gives that operational reality its imaginative dimension and its civilizational consequence. The super-Earth universe's external presence gives the transition district a specific cultural identity in the global discourse, not merely the identity of a serious practitioner community producing high-quality operational intelligence about the post-institutional transition, which the Monday briefing and the Tuesday publishing session and the Friday reality stress test contribute, but the identity of a community with a genuine civilizational imagination, a community that is not merely navigating the post-institutional transition but actively imagining the civilization that the transition is moving toward and doing so with the specific quality of creative sophistication and operational groundedness that gives the imagination its credibility and its cultural authority. The fan fiction dimension of the Wednesday session is the element that is most frequently misunderstood by the people who encounter the session's description without the context this chapter has provided, and it deserves specific treatment here because the misunderstanding consistently produces the same error: the conflation of fan fiction with derivative fiction, the assumption that fiction set in an existing universe is necessarily less original and less culturally significant than fiction that creates its own entirely original universe from scratch. This assumption is wrong in the specific way that is most relevant to the transition district's purposes, because the super-Earth universe is not an existing universe in the sense of a completed, authoritative, creator-owned fictional world that the community's participants are contributing to with the fans' secondary relationship to the creator's primary authority. It is a collaboratively constructed universe in which there is no primary authority and no secondary contributor. A universe that exists only through the contributions of its community's members and that is therefore owned collectively, in the specific sense that intellectual property can be held collectively by the community that is building it. The fan fiction dimension of the Wednesday session is therefore not the secondary creative activity of contributors to someone else's universe, but the primary creative activity of co-creators of a shared universe, a collaborative creative practice with the specific organizational benefits of the shared universe's established governing principles and accumulated imaginative materials, and the specific creative freedom of a universe that is genuinely open to development in any direction that the community's collective creative intelligence determines is most generative. The Wednesday session's relationship to the rest of the week's metabolism is the relationship of the imagination to the practice, the specific quality of shared imaginative framework that gives the week's practical activities their civilizational dimension and prevents the community from becoming a competent professional development program rather than a genuine civilizational prototype. The Monday briefing's cognitive synchronization with the accelerating landscape is informed and enriched by the Wednesday session's speculative engagement with what the landscape's trajectory might produce, because the practitioners who have been consistently imagining possible futures in the super-Earth universe's context are the practitioners who bring to the Monday briefing's trajectory reading the specific quality of imaginative pattern recognition that allows the trajectory reading to extend beyond the identification of the current direction and into the speculative exploration of where the current direction might lead. The Tuesday publishing session's sovereign publishing practice is informed and enriched by the Wednesday session's mythological production, because the publishers who are consistently contributing to the shared universe's imaginative development are the publishers whose own publications carry the specific quality of genuine civilizational imagination that distinguishes the sovereign publisher's work from the content marketer's work in the specific dimension that the sovereign publisher most needs to maintain. The Thursday transition dinner's honest knowledge transfer is informed and enriched by the Wednesday session's character development, because the initiated practitioners who have been consistently developing the super-Earth universe's initiated practitioner characters are the practitioners who have the most articulate and most imaginatively developed account of what the initiated practitioner's specific experience actually consists of, the most available vocabulary for the specific kinds of honest self-disclosure that the transition dinner requires. And the Friday reality stress test's operational assessment of proposed life designs is informed and enriched by the Wednesday session's scenario analysis, because the practitioners who have been consistently analyzing the super-Earth universe's possible futures are the practitioners whose failure mode mapping of proposed life designs extends most naturally and most accurately into the specific future conditions that the proposed designs will have to survive rather than remaining focused on the present conditions that the designs have already taken into account. The Wednesday session is the week's imaginative center of gravity, the specific activity around which the week's other activities acquire their civilizational dimension, and without which the week's other activities are the activities of a serious and effective professional development program, rather than the activities of a community that is genuinely in the business of prototyping a civilization. The mythology is not the decoration of the serious work. The mythology is the condition of the serious work's civilizational seriousness, the specific quality of shared imaginative commitment to the possible future being built that distinguishes the community's collective effort from the individual practitioner's aggregate of individual professional development projects. Without the Wednesday session's mythological production, the community is a collection of people who share a geography and share a program and share a governing vocabulary but who do not share an imagination. And the community without a shared imagination is not, in the deepest anthropological sense, a community at all. It is a professional network with pleasant weather and good coffee and a genuinely sophisticated operational curriculum. The Wednesday session is what makes it something more, what makes it the specific thing this handbook has been arguing it can and should become. The first conscious attempt to build the civilizational infrastructure that the post-institutional world requires, produced by a community that is simultaneously navigating the transition and imagining its destination and demonstrating, through the specific quality of the weekly practice that the Wednesday session makes possible, that the imagination and the navigation are not separate activities but expressions of the same genuinely civilizational commitment. The myth engine runs on Wednesday. The civilization is what it is building toward. The building is the point. Part 4. The weekly METABOLISM Chapter 21. Thursday. The hard knowledge transfer. The Thursday transition dinner is the week's most socially demanding activity and the community's most operationally irreplaceable one, and the relationship between these two qualities, the social demand and the operational irreplaceability, is not coincidental. It is causal. The specific operational knowledge that the Thursday dinner is designed to transfer is the specific kind of knowledge that is most resistant to every form of transmission other than the face-to-face conversation between people who have earned the right to each other's honest account of their experience through the specific quality of mutual trust that sustained physical community generates, the knowledge that is too granular for publication, too personal for the workshop format, too operationally specific for the Monday briefing's collective intelligence exercise, and too emotionally loaded for the Friday reality stress test's formal assessment culture to handle without the social container that the shared meal and the small table and the deliberately mixed company of the Thursday dinner provide. The knowledge that the Thursday dinner transmits is the knowledge of what the transition actually costs. Not the average cost, not the conceptual cost, not the inspiring account of how the cost was worth paying, but the specific cost in the specific life of the specific person across the table, described with the specific honesty that the transition dinner's social architecture is uniquely designed to make possible and that every other social context in the community's life is, in various ways, and to various degrees, designed against. The social architecture of the Thursday transition dinner is therefore not incidental to its function. It is the function's primary enabling condition, and the dinner's operational purpose cannot be achieved without the specific social conditions that the architecture creates. This makes the architecture the most important design element of the Thursday dinner, more important than the specific questions asked or the specific topics covered or the specific combination of initiated and uninitiated practitioners assembled at the table, because the architecture is the precondition for all of these elements' effectiveness. The architecture that produces the social conditions required for the honest account is the architecture this chapter is primarily concerned with describing, before the operational specifics of the dinner's content and facilitation are addressed, because the architecture's logic must be understood before the content and facilitation can be designed with the specific sensitivity to the social conditions they must preserve that makes the dinner work rather than producing the characteristic failure modes that the dinner's demanding social requirements make it vulnerable to. The first architectural element is scale. The Thursday dinner is a small gathering between 8 and 12 people at maximum, and more often between 8 and 10. This scale is not a logistical convenience. It is a deliberate and essential feature of the dinner's social architecture, determined by the specific cognitive and social constraints on the honest account that the dinner is designed to produce. The honest account of one's own transition, the specific, granular, emotionally honest description of the specific ways in which the transition was harder than anticipated, the specific failure modes that were encountered, the specific financial realities that the aspiration had not adequately accounted for, the specific relationship costs that the transition produced, the specific periods of genuine doubt about whether the transition was worth continuing, is a form of self-disclosure that, requires a specific kind of social safety to be genuinely offered rather than performed. The specific kind of social safety required is the safety of the small group, the safety of a gathering small enough that every person at the table is known to every other person at the table in at least the basic sense of mutual recognition, small enough that the disclosure is made to specific individuals rather than to an audience, and small enough that the risk of the disclosure is proportional to the intimacy of the relationship rather than to the exposure of the large group context in which the disclosure would be offered to people of unknown and untested trustworthiness. The dinner at 8 to 10 people creates this safety. The dinner at 20 people does not. It creates an audience, and the honest account offered to an audience is always already a performance of the honest account rather than the honest account itself, calibrated to the social dynamics of audience management rather than to the genuine relational dynamics of pure truth-telling. The second architectural element is the social mixture. The Thursday dinner deliberately assembles a table whose composition crosses the primary social categories that the transition district's community is organized around: the initiated and the uninitiated, the recently arrived and the long-established, the practitioners whose sovereign practices are operating in different domains, the people who came to the district from different prior professional contexts and different prior geographic contexts and different prior cultural contexts. The social mixture is the dinner's primary engine of the knowledge transfer, because the knowledge transfer that the dinner is designed to produce is not the transfer of knowledge within a single social category, the initiated practitioners talking among themselves about the specific operational challenges of their advanced sovereign practices, but the transfer across the social categories, the specific dynamic in which the initiated practitioner's honest account of their own transition is received and made meaningful by the uninitiated arrival's recognition of their own current condition in the account, and the uninitiated arrival's honest account of their own current condition is received and made operationally useful by the initiated practitioner's pattern recognition of the specific failure mode in development or the specific asset being underutilized that the account reveals to someone with the experiential framework to read it. The social mixture's effectiveness depends on the specific quality of the table's composition, and the composition is therefore not a matter of random assembly but of deliberate curation. The dinner's curation is one of the week's most skilled and most consequential facilitation tasks, requiring the curators to maintain the community's ongoing social map with sufficient granularity to identify the specific combinations of participants that will produce the most generative transfers in the specific current conditions of the community's membership. The curation considers the specific current stages of the uninitiated arrival's conversion arcs. The arrival who is in the atmospheric reception phase needs a different table composition from the arrival who is in the operational engagement phase, because the arrival in atmospheric reception needs the specific combination of warmth and honest ambient culture that a table composition heavy with long-established initiated practitioners with well-developed social ease in the dinner format provides, while the arrival in operational engagement needs the specific combination of experienced pattern recognition and genuine peer challenge that a table composition including both initiated practitioners and uninitiated arrivals at comparable stages of their transition provides. The curation also considers the specific current challenges of the initiated practitioners. The practitioner who is navigating a specific financial stress in their sovereign practice needs the specific combination of peer solidarity and honest operational intelligence about comparable challenges that a table including other practitioners with similar or comparable prior financial stress experience provides, while the practitioner who is in a productive period of their practice and is most positioned to contribute to the uninitiated arrival's transitions is best placed at a table where that contribution is most directly enabled by the uninitiated arrival's specific current needs. The third architectural element is the shared meal. The specific social function of the shared meal, the specific quality of social ease and mutual vulnerability and genuine peer encounter that sharing food with specific people in a specific place at a specific time consistently produces, is not reducible to the nutritional function of the eating or the aesthetic function of the food's quality or the economic function of the restaurant's or cook's revenue, and it is not fully explicable in sociological terms, though sociology has extensively documented the cross-cultural universality of the meal's social bonding function. The shared meal works for the Thursday dinner's purposes because it provides the specific quality of embodied social engagement. The engagement in which the participants are simultaneously sharing a sensory experience, performing a basic act of human sustenance, and conducting a conversation that lowers the social defenses that the more formal contexts of the Monday briefing and the Tuesday publishing session and the Friday reality stress test maintain, without lowering them into the specific vulnerability of the one-on-one intimate conversation that produces a different quality of disclosure with different social dynamics than the small group dinner produces. The shared meal is the specific social technology for the small group's honest conversation that every human culture has developed independently, and the Thursday dinner's use of it is not a romantic gesture toward the tradition of the symposium or the convivium or the Shabbat table, but an operational deployment of the specific social technology that the dinner's knowledge transfer function requires. The fourth architectural element is the question structure. The Thursday dinner is not an unstructured social gathering in which the conversation is allowed to develop organically from the participants' natural social inclinations, which in a community of sophisticated professionals typically produces the specific combination of interesting intellectual discussion and careful social positioning that is pleasant and stimulating but not the dinner's purpose. It is a lightly structured conversation organized by a specific set of governing questions that the dinner's facilitator introduces at the appropriate moments to move the conversation from the pleasant social engagement of the dinner's opening toward the specific honest operational engagement that the dinner's knowledge transfer function requires. The governing questions are not a formal interview protocol. They are not asked in sequence, not posed to each participant in rotation, not used to produce a systematic coverage of a predetermined topic list. They are the specific prompts that the facilitator introduces when the conversation's natural development has reached a point where the governing question's specific directional nudge is most likely to move it toward the honest operational territory that the dinner is designed to cover, without the abruptness of a context switch that would disrupt the social ease that the shared meal and the opening conversation have been building. The governing questions that the Transition District's Thursday dinner tradition has developed through the community's accumulated experience of what questions most reliably produce the honest operational accounts that the dinner is designed to generate are organized around four primary themes, each of which addresses a specific dimension of the transition's honest cost that the aspirational culture most consistently omits and that the dinner's knowledge transfer function most urgently needs to make available. The four themes are the financial reality, the relational cost, the identity dissolution, and the unexpected gift. The financial reality theme is the theme that the aspirational culture is most thoroughly in denial about, and that the honest account is therefore most urgently required to address. The question that opens this theme is not how do you make money, which is the question that the professional networking context produces and that generates the curated account of the sovereign practices economic model at its most presentable. But when did you first understand that the financial reality of the transition was different from the financial reality you had planned for, and what specifically was different? This question is designed to produce the specific moment of honest financial disclosure, the specific month and the specific number and the specific gap between the projection and the reality, that the aspirational discussion systematically suppresses in the service of the aspiration's inspirational function, and that the uninitiated arrival most urgently needs to hear in order to calibrate their own financial planning for the transition they are undertaking or planning. The honest financial account is the dinner's most operationally valuable single contribution to the uninitiated arrival's transition preparation, because it is the account that is most directly and most immediately applicable to the specific financial decisions the uninitiated arrival is currently making, and that the aspirational culture's omission of honest financial reality is most directly compromising. The relational cost theme is the theme that is most emotionally loaded and most resistant to honest account in any social context, including the Thursday dinner, and the question that opens it must therefore be introduced at the specific moment in the dinner's social development when the table has achieved sufficient mutual trust to make the emotional loading manageable rather than overwhelming. The question is, what relationship in your life was most changed by the transition, and how did the change happen? This question is designed to produce the specific honest account of the relational costs of the transition, the specific friendships that were strained or lost, the specific family relationships that were tested or transformed, the specific professional relationships that the transition required to be renegotiated in ways that were not always successful, that the aspirational culture most thoroughly denies in its insistence on the transition's liberation from constraint. The relational costs are real, and they are the costs that uninitiated arrivals are least prepared for because the aspirational narrative of the post-institutional transition consistently frames the transition as a movement toward more authentic and more meaningful relationships rather than as a movement that disrupts the specific relational architecture that the institutional context had been maintaining and that the sovereign life must rebuild in a different form with different people in different conditions. The honest account of the relational costs is not a discouragement. It is a specific form of preparation that allows the uninitiated arrival to approach the transition's relational disruptions with realistic expectations, rather than the shock of discovering costs that the aspiration had led them to believe would not exist. The identity dissolution theme is the theme that addresses the specific psychological experience of the between state described in Part 1 of this handbook, the experience of identity without architecture, in its specific lived texture rather than its intellectual description. The question that opens this theme is, what was the moment when you were most convinced that you had made a mistake, and what specifically made you feel that way? This question is designed to produce the specific honest account of the transition's darkest phase, the specific moment of maximum doubt, the specific form that the doubt took, the specific external conditions that coincided with the doubt to make it feel most justified, and the specific thing that made continuing the transition seem worth attempting despite the doubt. This is the account that the aspirational culture most thoroughly suppresses, the account of the moment of genuine conviction that the transition was a mistake, because the aspiration's inspirational function requires the transition to be framed as a continuous movement towards something better rather than a process that passes through specific phases of genuine despair. The honest account of the moment of maximum doubt is the dinner's most psychologically valuable contribution to the uninitiated arrival's transition preparation, because it is the account that most directly prepares the arrival for the specific phase of the conversion arc, the valley described in Chapter 15's treatment of the dream validation framework, that produces the largest proportion of abandoned transitions, and because the preparation is provided through the specific mechanism that most effectively makes the preparation genuinely useful, the direct, embodied, honest testimony of a specific person who passed through that specific phase and survived it. The unexpected gift theme is the theme that completes the honest account by addressing the specific dimension of the transition that the aspirational culture gets approximately right but for the wrong reasons and in the wrong terms. The question that opens this theme is, what did the transition produce that you could not have anticipated and that has become the thing you are most grateful for? This question is not an invitation to return to the aspirational narrative. It is an invitation to identify, with the same operational specificity that the preceding themes have applied to the costs, the specific unexpected benefits that the transition has produced in the specific lived reality of the person's actual experience rather than in the generic terms of freedom and authenticity and meaning that the aspirational narrative provides. The unexpected gifts that the honest account of this theme typically reveals are the specific things that the aspirational narrative does not mention because they are too specific to be inspirational in the generic sense. The specific community relationship that the transition made possible in ways that the institutional context would have prevented, the specific creative capability that the necessity of the transition's financial challenges forced the practitioner to develop, the specific intellectual territory that the transition's freedom from institutional obligation opened for exploration, the specific quality of self-knowledge that the transition's identity dissolution produced as its most durable consequence. The unexpected gift theme is the dinner's contribution to the uninitiated arrival's hope. Not the generic, inflated hope of the aspirational narrative, but the specific, honest, operationally grounded hope of someone who has heard the specific costs and the specific challenges and the specific moments of genuine doubt and who has also heard, with the same operational honesty, the specific things that made the costs worth bearing. The facilitation of the Thursday dinner is the most demanding facilitation task in the week's metabolism. And the specific quality of the facilitation is the primary determinant of whether any specific dinner achieves the honest operational knowledge transfer that the dinner's format is designed to produce or produces, instead one of the several characteristic failure modes that the dinner's social demands make it vulnerable to. The primary failure mode is the management of impression, the specific social dynamic in which the table's participants, aware that their honest accounts will be received and assessed by people they will continue to be in community with, calibrate their accounts toward the version that presents their transition most favorably rather than the version that is most operationally honest, producing a dinner of interesting but carefully curated accounts rather than the genuinely honest accounts the dinner is designed to generate. The management of impression failure mode is most effectively prevented by the initiated practitioner's modeling of genuine honest account. The specific social norm setting that occurs when an initiated practitioner with established credibility and established community standing offers the first genuinely honest account of the evening, demonstrating through the specific quality of the account that the table is a space where genuine honesty is both expected and valued, and that the social risk of genuine honesty is lower in the specific context than the social risk of careful impression management, because the community that has heard genuine honest accounts develops a specific and reliable pattern of genuinely honoring and genuinely appreciating the honesty rather than using it as material for the social judgment that the management of impression is protecting against. The second failure mode is the therapeutic drift, the specific dynamic in which the dinner's emotionally loaded content produces a shift in the conversation's register from the operational to the therapeutic, in which the honest accounts of the transition's costs generate an emotional response in the table's participants that redirects the conversation toward the processing of those emotions rather than the extraction of the operational intelligence that the emotions are the evidence of. The therapeutic drift is not the same as the acknowledgement of the emotional dimension of the transition's honest account, which is both appropriate and necessary. The dismissal of the emotional dimension in the name of operational focus would produce its own failure mode, the specifically false operational objectivity that treats the emotionally loaded dimensions of the transition as if they were emotionally neutral and thereby produces operational assessments that are systematically inaccurate in precisely the emotionally charged dimensions that most strongly influence the transition's actual course. The therapeutic drift is the specific drift beyond the acknowledgement of the emotional dimension into the sustained processing of the emotions themselves, which produces a dinner that is genuinely supportive and genuinely valuable as a form of emotional community, but that is not accomplishing the specific operational knowledge transfer that the dinner's format is designed to produce and that the community's other activities are not designed to produce in its place. The facilitation's role in preventing the therapeutic drift is the specific practice of honoring the emotional dimension, acknowledging it genuinely, allowing it to be present in the conversation at the level at which it is genuinely present in the account, while maintaining the conversation's orientation toward the operational intelligence that the emotional account is the evidence of. The third failure mode is the advice cascade, the specific dynamic in which the initiated practitioner's operational knowledge, activated by the uninitiated arrival's honest accounts of their current challenges, produces a flood of specific operational advice that overwhelms the dinner's conversational dynamic and converts the dinner from the honest peer exchange it is designed to be into the expert consultation that the dinner's format is specifically designed not to be. The advice cascade failure mode is the most counterintuitive of the three, because it is generated by the initiated practitioner's genuine desire to be helpful, to deploy their operational knowledge in direct service of the uninitiated arrival's immediate challenges, which is a genuinely admirable impulse and the dinner's desired dynamic in the specific, limited, proportionate form that the dinner's social architecture is designed to produce. The cascade occurs when the impulse is deployed without the specific discipline of proportionality and mutual exchange that the dinner's social architecture requires, when the initiated practitioner's operational advice displaces rather than enriches the uninitiated arrival's own honest accounts, converting the dinner into a transmission session rather than the genuine peer exchange in which both kinds of knowledge, the initiated practitioner's operational depth and the uninitiated arrival's fresh signal and genuine current challenge, contribute to a collective intelligence that is richer than either alone. The facilitation's role in preventing the advice cascade is the specific practice of ensuring that each initiated practitioner's contribution to the operational discussion is followed by the genuine return of the conversational floor to the uninitiated arrival's accounts, maintaining the balance of contribution that makes the dinner a genuine peer exchange rather than a mentorship session conducted over food. The documentation of the Thursday dinner's outcomes is the most ethically complex aspect of the dinner's operation, because the honesty that the dinner is designed to produce depends on the social safety that the dinner's architecture creates, and the social safety depends in part on the dinner's confidentiality. The specific norm that what is said at the table stays at the table in the sense that no specific account is attributed to any specific person in any context outside the dinner, without that person's explicit consent. The documentation that the transition district's knowledge management function requires, the aggregation of the operational knowledge that the dinners collectively produce into the community's knowledge base, the specific documentation of the failure modes and their patterns and their early warning signals and their antidotes that the dream validation framework's failure mode mapping draws on, must therefore be conducted at the level of the aggregate rather than the individual, extracting the patterns from the specific accounts without attributing the patterns to the specific individuals whose accounts generated them, and maintaining the dinner's confidentiality norm as the non-negotiable precondition for the dinner's continued ability to produce the honest accounts that the documentation exists to aggregate. The Thursday dinner's connection to the rest of the week's metabolism is the connection of the human dimension to the operational and imaginative dimensions that the week's other activities address. The Monday briefing's cognitive synchronization with the accelerating landscape is made human by the Thursday dinner's specific human accounts of what the landscape's acceleration is doing to specific people's specific lives. What the specific AI development that the Monday briefing identified as operationally significant is actually producing in the specific lived experience of the practitioner who encountered it in the specific conditions of their specific sovereign practice. The Wednesday session's mythological production is given its emotional grounding by the Thursday dinner's honest accounts of the specific human experiences that the mythology is imagining in fictional form. The specific quality of the identity dissolution that the Super-Earth universe's character development is exploring in speculative form is given its specific emotional texture by the honest account of the identity dissolution's actual lived experience that the Thursday dinner makes available to the community's mythology producers. The Friday reality stress test's operational assessment of proposed life designs is made more honest and more complete by the Thursday dinner's prior transmission of the specific failure modes that the dinner's week has identified. The specific patterns that the week's dinner accounts have revealed in the transitions currently underway in the community that the Friday stress test assessment must incorporate to be genuinely current. The Thursday dinner is the week's human center of gravity, the specific activity through which the community's collective operational intelligence is given its human face, its emotional reality, and its specific moral weight, and its unexpected gifts, is transmitted with the specific honesty that only the face-to-face encounter between people who have earned each other's trust through the sustained practice of genuine community can produce. And its unexpected gifts is transmitted with the specific honesty that only the face-to-face encounter between people who have earned each other's trust through the sustained practice of genuine community can produce. The knowledge is hard because the experience it is derived from is hard. The transmission is honest because the social architecture of the Thursday dinner is designed to make honesty safer than its alternatives. The knowledge transfer is the community's most essential function because it is the function that no other element of the community's design can perform and that the transition's success most directly depends on. Every sovereign practitioner who completes the transition carrying the specific operational intelligence that the Thursday dinners transmitted, who knew, before encountering the financial reality at its sharpest, that the gap between projection and reality at months 8 through 14 is the specific challenge that the dinner's honest accounts had prepared them for, who knew, before encountering the relational cost at its most acute, that the specific quality of the relational disruption the dinner had described was the transitional condition rather than the permanent one, who knew, before reaching the moment of maximum doubt, that the moment of maximum doubt had been survived by the specific people at the specific tables whose specific accounts had made the survival seem possible before the need for it was acute. Every such practitioner is the Thursday dinner's most consequential output and the transition district's most durable proof of concept. The dinner is on Thursday. The table is small. The food is real. The conversation is honest. The knowledge is hard. The transfer is the point. Part 4. The weekly METABOLISM Chapter 22, Friday. Operational honesty as practice. Every community organized around transformative purpose develops, over time, a characteristic relationship to the truth about whether its transformative purpose is being achieved. The relationship takes one of three forms, and the form it takes is the primary determinant of whether the community achieves genuine long-term cultural authority or produces the specific kind of cultural inflation that eventually discredits the community in the eyes of the people it is most trying to serve. The first form is the relationship of denial. The community whose culture systematically suppresses honest assessment of whether its transformative purpose is being achieved in favor of the affirmational narrative that maintains community cohesion at the cost of genuine operational intelligence. The second form is the relationship of cynicism, the community whose culture systematically overweights the honest assessment of failure at the cost of the genuine recognition of achievement, producing a culture of perpetual critique that is intellectually rigorous in its identification of what is not working and operationally useless in its failure to generate the specific constructive intelligence that would make what is not working work better. The third form is the relationship of operational honesty, the community whose culture maintains the specific difficult balance between genuine honest assessment of what is not working and genuine honest recognition of what is, producing the specific kind of actionable intelligence that distinguishes the community's feedback culture from both the affirmational culture's comfort and the cynical culture's rigor. The Friday reality stress test is the transition district's primary institutional expression of the third form, the specific weekly practice through which the community's relationship to operational honesty is maintained as an active discipline rather than a passive aspiration, and through which the specific culture of genuine honest assessment that the transition district's governing framework requires as its most fundamental operating condition is practiced, week after week, in a specific social context and through a specific structured format that makes the honest assessment achievable without making it cruel, useful without making it comfortable, and sustainable without making it complacent. The reality stress test is not merely a feedback mechanism or a proposal review or a peer accountability session, though it performs all of these functions. It is the community's primary practice of what this chapter is calling operational honesty, the specific cultivated capacity for accurate, actionable, caring assessment of whether a proposed or actual sovereign practice is adequate to the operational conditions it must survive, developed through the consistent weekly exercise of the specific cognitive and social skills that genuine honest assessment requires. The name requires justification because stress testing has a specific technical meaning in engineering and financial contexts that the community's use of the term partially inherits and partially departs from in ways that are worth making explicit. In engineering, stress testing is the practice of subjecting a physical structure to forces exceeding its normal operating conditions in order to identify the specific points at which the structure's integrity is compromised. The specific failure modes that the structure's design must address before the structure is deployed in conditions where its failure would have serious consequences. In financial contexts, stress testing is the practice of subjecting a financial model to conditions more adverse than the model's baseline assumptions in order to identify the specific points at which the model's viability is compromised, the specific scenarios under which the financial architecture's adequacy is threatened. The transition district's reality stress test inherits from both of these uses the fundamental logic of subjecting a proposed design to conditions more challenging than the baseline assumptions in order to reveal its failure modes before the deployment that would make those failure modes consequential. It departs from both in the specific nature of the design being tested, not a physical structure or a financial model but a proposed life design, which is subject to failure modes that are not purely physical or financial but that are simultaneously operational, psychological, relational, temporal, and mythological, and in the specific nature of the testing conditions, which are not the simulated adverse scenarios of engineering and financial stress testing but the community's genuine collective intelligence, brought to bear on the proposed design with the honest intention of identifying the failure modes that the proposer's individual perspective on their own proposal is most likely to have missed. The reality stress test's weekly format is organized around a specific sequence of activities whose design reflects the specific social and cognitive requirements of genuine honest assessment in the community context. The sequence has 4 primary phases: the presentation, the clarification exchange, the honest assessment, and the constructive synthesis. Each phase serves a specific function in the production of the operationally useful assessment that the stress test is designed to generate, and each phase's specific design reflects the specific failure modes that the phase is most vulnerable to and that the design must actively prevent. The presentation is the stress test's opening phase, and it is the phase in which the practitioner who is submitting their proposed or actual sovereign practice for the community's assessment presents the practice in the specific form that the stress test's assessment requires. The presentation's form is not the pitch, the version of the proposed practice that is designed to generate enthusiasm and investment in the proposal's potential. And it is not the report, the version of the actual practice that is designed to document progress toward established objectives. It is the operational brief, the specific, honest, self-critical account of the proposed or actual practice in the specific format that makes the honest assessment most immediately possible. The operational brief's required components are the specific design of the proposed or actual practice, the specific assumptions underlying the design, the specific metrics against which the practice's success will be assessed, the specific elements of the design that the presenter believes are most adequately addressed, and, crucially, the specific elements of the design that the presenter believes are most inadequately addressed and that they most want the community's assessment to engage with. The requirement to include the self-identified inadequacies in the operational brief is the stress test's most important and most distinctive structural feature, because it establishes the honest self-assessment as the presentation's primary mode rather than the curated self-presentation that every other professional context rewards. The practitioner who presents their proposed practice to the Friday stress test is expected to know where their proposal is weakest, to have engaged in the genuine self-assessment that identifies the specific elements most in need of the community's honest intelligence, and to present those elements with the same operational specificity as the elements they are most confident about, because the community's most valuable assessment is the assessment of the specific elements that the presenter's own honest self-assessment has already identified as problematic, rather than the assessment that re-identifies the obvious problems that the presenter has not yet acknowledged. The clarification exchange is the stress test's second phase, and it is the phase in which the community's members ask the specific questions that allow them to understand the operational brief with sufficient clarity and sufficient depth to conduct the honest assessment that the brief is requesting. The clarification exchange is not a discussion of the brief's merits. The assessment phase has not yet begun, and the clarification exchange's specific purpose is the provision of the understanding that the assessment requires, not the conduct of the assessment itself. The facilitation's primary responsibility in the clarification exchange is the maintenance of this distinction, the prevention of the characteristic failure mode of the premature assessment, in which the clarification questions are actually thinly disguised assessment statements that communicate the questioner's evaluative response to the brief without the commitment to the honest account that the assessment phase's format requires. The premature assessment failure mode is one of the most common and most damaging in the Friday stress tests operation, because it produces the specific social dynamic in which the presenter is receiving informal assessment signals through the clarification phase without the specific social protections that the assessment phase's format provides, without the formal acknowledgement that what is being offered is an evaluative judgment rather than a genuine request for clarification, without the structured balance of the assessment phase's design that ensures the honest assessment is provided in the specific combination of honest critique and honest recognition that operational honesty requires, and without the constructive synthesis phase's conversion of the assessment into the actionable guidance that makes the critique useful rather than merely accurate. The honest assessment is the stress test's central phase, and it is the phase in which the community's genuine collective intelligence is brought to bear on the operational brief-specific elements with the honest intention of identifying the failure modes, the inadequacies, the unexamined assumptions, and the specific points of vulnerability that the presenter's individual perspective on their own proposal is most likely to have missed. The honest assessment's design must navigate the most difficult balance in the entire stress tests operation, the balance between the honesty that makes the assessment useful and the care that makes the honesty receivable. This balance is difficult because honesty and care appear, in the social dynamics of most professional communities, to be in tension, because the specific forms of honest assessment that are most operationally useful tend to be the forms that are most socially uncomfortable, that address the most personally significant elements of the proposed practice in the most direct terms that the operational accuracy of the assessment requires, while the specific forms of care that most effectively support the assessment's reception tend to be the forms that soften, qualify, and contextualize the honest assessment in ways that reduce its social discomfort at the cost of some of its operational clarity. The resolution of this apparent tension is the specific cultural achievement that the Friday stress test is designed to produce, and that the transition district's community must develop through the consistent weekly practice of the honest assessment rather than assuming it will be available from the community's natural social dynamics, which consistently favor either the dishonest comfort of excessive care or the uncare of excessive honesty over the genuinely difficult balance that operational honesty requires. The resolution is not a compromise between honesty and care but a specific synthesis that the consistent practice of the honest assessment in the stress test's specific social context produces over time, the synthesis in which the community's members develop the specific capability of caring honesty, the specific quality of engaged, genuinely invested, operationally accurate assessment that is motivated by the genuine desire for the practitioner's success and that therefore delivers the honest assessment with the specific quality of investment and care that makes the honest assessment feel, to the practitioner receiving it, like the expression of the community's genuine concern for their success rather than the expression of the community's evaluative judgment of their proposal's merit. The specific practices through which the honest assessment phase maintains the caring honesty balance are organized around three specific disciplines that the community's initiated practitioners model through their own engagement with the assessment and that the facilitation actively maintains against the drift toward either of the balance's failure modes. The first discipline is the distinction between the assessment of the proposal and the assessment of the proposer, the consistent maintenance of the norm that the Friday stress test is assessing the specific elements of the proposed or actual sovereign practice, not the intelligence or the character or the capability of the person who proposed them. This distinction is both philosophically important. The honest assessment of a proposal's weaknesses is not a judgment of the proposer's intelligence, because the proposals that survive the stress test's honest assessment are almost always proposals that have been significantly modified from their original form through the specific community intelligence that the assessment provides, which means that the unmodified proposal's weaknesses are evidence of the limits of the individual. Practitioners' pre-assessment intelligence about the specific domain, not of the limits of their intelligence in general, and practically important, because the conflation of the proposal's assessment with the proposer's assessment is the specific social dynamic that most consistently produces the defensive response to honest assessment that prevents the honest assessment from being genuinely received. The second discipline is the specificity norm, the consistent maintenance of the norm that every assessment statement in the honest assessment phase must be specific enough to be actionable, which means specific enough to identify the particular element of the proposed practice being assessed, the particular failure mode being identified in that element, the particular conditions under which the failure mode is most likely to occur, and the particular modifications to the element that would address the failure mode with the least cost to the proposal's overall design integrity. The assessment that lacks this specificity is not an honest assessment in the operational sense. It is an accurate feeling about the proposal's overall quality that cannot be translated into the specific modifications that the constructive synthesis phase requires. The third discipline is the balance norm, the consistent maintenance of the norm that every honest assessment of the proposal's inadequacies is accompanied by an equally specific honest assessment of the proposal's genuine strengths, the elements that are working well, and that the constructive synthesis should deliberately preserve against the pressure of the modifications that addressing the inadequacies will generate. The facilitation of the honest assessment phase is the Friday stress test's most demanding facilitation task, and the specific capabilities required for this facilitation are the capabilities that the initiated practitioner who has been through multiple cycles of the stress test from both the presenting and the assessing positions is most likely to have developed. The facilitation requires the simultaneous maintenance of multiple specific social dynamics, the dynamic of genuine honest engagement against the drift toward either excessive comfort or excessive harshness, the dynamic of collaborative intelligence against the drift toward the individual expert's dominance of the assessment, the dynamic of specific operational focus against the drift toward both the abstract theoretical analysis that is intellectually interesting and operationally unhelpful, and the personal emotional processing that is humanly important and operationally displaced from the stress test's specific purpose. These simultaneous maintenance requirements make the Friday stress test's facilitation the specific task in the week's metabolism that most benefits from the initiated practitioner's accumulated experience of the stress test's specific social dynamics and most suffers from the uninitiated arrival's natural facilitation style, which is typically shaped by the professional meeting formats of the institutional context and is therefore inadequately designed for the specific social conditions of the honest assessment that the stress test requires. The constructive synthesis is the stress test's fourth phase, and it is the phase in which the honest assessment's outputs, the specific failure modes identified, the specific inadequacies addressed, the specific strengths recognized, are converted into the specific, actionable, prioritized guidance that the presenter can carry into the next iteration of their proposed or actual sovereign practices development. The constructive synthesis is not a summary of the honest assessment. It is a specific act of collective intelligence in which the community's members work together to translate the assessment's honest evaluative content into the specific design modifications that will most effectively address the identified failure modes with the least cost to the proposal's overall integrity and the proposer's ongoing engagement with the practice's development. The constructive synthesis requires the specific collective skill of prioritization, the identification, from among the potentially extensive list of modifications that the honest assessment has generated, of the specific subset that are most urgently required for the practice's near-term viability, the specific subset that are important but not urgent and that should be addressed in the subsequent iteration rather than the immediate one, and the specific subset that have been identified as problems but that are not adequately addressed by any of the available modifications and that must therefore be carried forward as open uncertainties that the practice's ongoing development will need to resolve through the specific operational testing that the current state of the community's collective intelligence cannot conclusively address in the abstract. The presenter's role in the constructive synthesis is active rather than passive. The presenter is not receiving the synthesis as a verdict on their proposal but participating in its construction as the primary expert on the specific constraints and capabilities of their own sovereign practice that the synthesis must respect in order to produce modifications that are genuinely implementable rather than theoretically optimal. The presenter's active participation in the constructive synthesis is the specific element of the stress tests format that most directly embodies the dream validation framework's principle of the proposer's genuine agency in the modification of their own proposed life design. The principle that the community's honest assessment is a resource for the proposer's own design improvement rather than an authority over it, and that the proposer's own judgment about what modifications are genuinely implementable given their specific constraints and capabilities must be respected in the synthesis even when the community's assessment would, in the abstract, recommend modifications that the proposer's own judgment identifies as incompatible with the specific realities of their situation that the community's assessment has not fully incorporated. The documentation of the Friday stress test's outcomes is less ethically complex than the documentation of the Thursday dinner, because the stress test's outputs are explicitly offered for community assessment rather than confided in the context of personal trust, and the documentation of the assessment's specific content is therefore not subject to the confidentiality constraints that the dinner's social architecture requires. The stress test's documentation serves several functions in the community's knowledge management system: the individual practitioner's ongoing Dreamcatcher protocol record, the community's aggregate failure mode database, the community's case library of sovereign practice designs at different stages of development, and the community's published contribution to the global discourse about what the post-institutional transition requires. The published contribution is the stress test's primary contribution to the transition district's global recognition strategy, the specific form of documented, community-tested, operationally honest assessment of sovereign practice designs that is the most direct expression of the community's commitment to operational honesty as a cultural standard and the most credible evidence of that commitment's genuine practice rather than its mere aspiration. The Friday stress test's relationship to the rest of the week's metabolism is the relationship of accountability to the orientation, production, imagination, and knowledge transfer that the week's other activities provide. The Monday briefing provides the cognitive landscape within which the proposed sovereign practices are being designed and against which their adequacy must be assessed. The Tuesday publishing session provides the specific production accountability that the stress test can draw on as direct operational evidence of the practitioner's current practice rather than the abstract proposal of a practice not yet attempted. The Wednesday session's scenario analysis provides the specific speculative explorations of the failure modes that the stress test's honest assessment can reference as imaginative foreshadowing of the specific operational challenges that the proposed practice is likely to encounter in the conditions the scenario analysis has identified as most plausible. The Thursday dinner's hard knowledge transfer provides the specific experiential content, the specific honest accounts of the specific failure modes that specific practitioners have encountered in specific conditions, that the stress test's honest assessment can draw on as its most directly relevant and most operationally accurate reference material for the failure mode mapping of any proposed practice in any domain that the dinner's community of practitioners collectively has experience in. The Friday reality stress test is therefore not merely the week's final programmatic activity before the Saturday atmosphere night and the Sunday integration. It is the week's accountability instrument, the specific practice through which the Monday briefing's cognitive orientation and the Tuesday session's production discipline and the Wednesday session's civilizational imagination and the Thursday dinner's hard knowledge transfer are all tested against the specific operational reality of the proposed and actual sovereign practices that the community's members are building. The test is honest because the community's culture demands honesty. The honesty is caring because the community's culture demands care. The caring honesty is operational because the community's governing framework demands operational specificity. And the operational specificity is actionable because the constructive synthesis demands that every honest assessment produce specific guidance rather than merely accurate evaluation. The combination of these four qualities, honesty, care, operational specificity, and actionable guidance, is what operational honesty means as a practice rather than a value, and the Friday stress test is where the practice is practiced week after week, in the specific social conditions and through the specific structured format that makes the practice achievable rather than merely aspirational. The alternative to the Friday stress test is not the absence of honest assessment. It is the presence of the dishonest assessment that every human community produces in the absence of the specific institutional structures designed to maintain honest assessment against the social pressures that consistently work against it. The dishonest assessment is the assessment that tells the practitioner their proposed practice is working when it is not, that the failure mode they have identified is manageable when it is not, that the financial projection is realistic when it is not, that the audience for their publication exists in the form they have imagined it when it does not. The dishonest assessment is not produced by malice. It is produced by the specific combination of social discomfort with honest critique, genuine care for the practitioner's feelings, and the ambient community pressure toward the positive that any community whose members are emotionally invested in each other's success consistently generates. The Friday stress test is the specific institutional structure designed to maintain honest assessment against precisely these pressures, not by suppressing the care or the positive orientation, but by providing the specific social context and the specific structured format that makes caring honesty the path of least resistance rather than the path of greatest social cost. The stress test does not make the community cold. It makes the community honest. And the community that is honest with its members about their sovereign practices is the community that produces sovereign practitioners who survive, who build practices adequate to the operational conditions they will encounter, who have been prepared for the specific failure modes they will face, who have received the specific caring honesty that made the preparation genuine rather than comforting. The practitioners who survive are the practitioners who build the civilization. The Friday stress test is where the survival capability is built week by week through the consistent practice of the one quality that the transition district's governing framework identifies as more important to the post-institutional transition's success than any amount of aspiration, enthusiasm, or beautiful geography. Operational honesty, practiced on Friday, built into the community's culture through the specific weekly exercise of the specific social and cognitive skills that genuine honest assessment requires. Sustained against the specific social pressures that work against it through the specific institutional design of the stress test's format and facilitation. Expressed in the specific actionable guidance of the constructive synthesis that makes the honest assessment useful rather than merely accurate. And transmitted, through the community's governing mythology and its global publishing practice, into the broader world as the transition district's most distinctive and most consequential cultural contribution to the post-institutional civilization. It is in the process of prototyping, the demonstration that operational honesty is not incompatible with genuine community, that caring and honest are not opposites, and that the specific combination of the two is the specific quality of assessment. Culture that makes the difference between the sovereign practices that survive the transition and the sovereign practices that do not. Part 4. The weekly METABOLISM Chapter 23. Saturday. The district as living medium. The Saturday atmosphere night is the week's most misunderstood element and the one most vulnerable to the specific misreading that would convert it from what it actually is, the community's primary instrument of atmospheric production, social proof generation, and territorial identity expression, into what it might superficially appear to be. A cultural amenity, a pleasant end-of-week gathering, a social event for the community's members to enjoy the accumulated productivity of the preceding days in a context of relaxed and aesthetically stimulating collective experience. The misreading is understandable because the Saturday night's specific qualities, the projections on the vacant storefronts, the NFP exhibitions in the empty commercial units, the ambient installations in the suspended plazas, the live publishing dispatches, the documentary screenings, the frontier-themed gatherings that extend into the late evening with the specific quality of sociality that the community's shared week of genuine work has earned, are genuinely enjoyable, and the enjoyment is real and is not incidental to the Saturday night's function. But the enjoyment is not the function. The function is the production of the district's atmospheric identity, the specific, visible, documentable, globally circulable demonstration that the liminal district has been inhabited by a living community, that the living community is producing genuine cultural output, and that the specific combination of liminal architecture and living cultural production that the Saturday night makes visible is the specific quality of activated atmosphere that converts the district from a beautiful but underoccupied premium development into the specific kind of place that the transition district's global recognition strategy requires it to be understood as. The distinction between the Saturday night as amenity and the Saturday night as atmospheric production instrument is the distinction between a community that celebrates its own existence and a community that demonstrates it. And the demonstration is strategic in ways that the celebration is not, serving purposes that extend beyond the community's own enjoyment and the community's own social cohesion into the specific external audiences whose understanding of the district's identity and purpose is the primary instrument of the global recognition strategy and the stakeholder conversation and the attraction of the next cohort of arriving practitioners. The Saturday night is the week's primary moment of public facing, the moment at which the community's internal culture becomes most visible to the external world, through the specific quality of the atmosphere it creates and the specific form of the documentation it generates and the specific character of the social media presence it produces and the specific quality of the lived experience it offers to the people, current community members, prospective community members, local stakeholders, international observers, who encounter it either in person or through the documentation that the evening's activities generate. The specific activities of the Saturday Atmosphere Night are organized around three primary functions: the territorial activation function, the cultural production function, and the social proof generation function. Each function is served by specific activities whose design reflects both the function's specific requirements and the specific atmospheric and spatial conditions of Aldea Zamo's liminal district that make those activities most effective in this specific context. The territorial activation function is the Saturday night's most foundational function, and the one most directly enabled by the specific condition of the liminal district described in Part 2 of this handbook. Territorial activation is the specific process through which a built environment that has been functioning as a container, a spatial and material structure waiting for the social and cultural life that would make it a place rather than merely a building, is converted, through the introduction of specific cultural activities into specific spaces, from a container into a living territory. The conversion is not permanent at the first activation. A single Saturday night of projections and exhibitions and gatherings does not transform the district's identity in a durable sense, but it is cumulative. Each Saturday night's territorial activation adds to the cumulative record of the district's activation, building the visible evidence of a pattern of cultural inhabitation that is more persuasive to both internal community members and external observers than any single dramatic activation event would be. The projection activity is the Saturday night's most visually striking element and the one that most directly exploits the specific spatial conditions of the liminal district. The projections are large-scale visual content, AI-generated architectural visions of the district's possible futures, super-Earth universe narrative sequences, documentary content from the community's own production, speculative cartographies of the post-corporate transition geography, visual essays on the governing vocabulary's primary concepts, projected onto the surfaces that the liminal district's specific condition makes most available and most symbolically resonant. The blank facades of vacant commercial units, the pedestrian corridors' unoccupied walls, the plaza surfaces that were designed for human activity, and that the Saturday night's projection converts from empty surfaces into active screens that carry the community's imagination into the physical space of the district. The projection activity's symbolic significance is the significance of the community's imagination inhabiting the district's emptiness, the specific act of filling the vacant surfaces with the community's cultural production in a form that makes both the production and the vacancy visible simultaneously, making the liminal conditions' productive potential legible in physical form to anyone who encounters the Saturday night's projection activity from any position, from within the community, from the sidewalk, from the residential buildings above, from the photographs and the videos that the evening's documentation generates. The projection content selection is one of the Saturday night's most important curatorial decisions, because the projection is the most publicly visible element of the evening's territorial activation, and therefore the element most directly responsible for communicating the community's identity and purpose to the broadest range of the evening's audiences. The curation must balance several considerations simultaneously: the internal community's engagement and resonance with the content, which requires the content to be genuinely connected to the community's current intellectual and creative development and not merely aesthetically impressive as a visual spectacle. The external audience's accessibility to the content, which requires the content to be comprehensible and engaging to people who are not yet familiar with the community's governing vocabulary and who are encountering the district's cultural identity through the projection as their primary point of engagement, and the documentation quality of the content, which requires the content to generate the specific kind of visual documentation, the striking image, the evocative sequence, the specific atmospheric quality, that the social proof generation function requires for circulation in the media and the social networks through which the community's global reputation is being built. The NFP exhibition is the Saturday night's most intellectually substantial element and the one most directly connected to the Tuesday publishing session's sovereign publishing practice and the community's commitment to the physical publication as the primary form of the durable cultural record. The NFP exhibition is the display of the community's physical publications, the printed, designed, materially produced documents that constitute the sovereign publisher's contribution to the permanent cultural record, in the specific spaces of the liminal district that the experimental accommodation model has made available for cultural activation. The specific spaces used for the NFP exhibition vary with the specific experimental accommodation arrangements that the community has secured with the relevant property stakeholders, and the negotiation of those arrangements is one of the Saturday night's primary contributions to the stakeholder conversation strategy. Each Saturday night's use of a previously inactive commercial space for the NFP exhibition is a demonstration, in the most tangible possible form, of the experimental accommodation model's claim that the community's cultural activation of vacant spaces produces a more valuable atmospheric contribution to the district's identity than the space's continued vacancy. The NFP exhibition's atmospheric contribution to the vacant commercial space is visible and immediate, the specific transformation of a dark and empty storefront into a lit and inhabited cultural space, displaying the community's intellectual production in the physical form that gives the intellectual production its most durable and most aesthetically serious presence, produces a specific atmospheric improvement in the immediate vicinity of the exhibition that is legible to any observer, regardless of their familiarity with the community's governing vocabulary or the NFP's specific content. The exhibition's curation principle is the same principle that governs the sovereign publishing practice's editorial identity, the commitment to the specific quality of intellectual and creative production that the community's standards of honest assessment require, rather than the quantity of production that the ambition to fill the exhibition space might generate. The NFP exhibition is not a display of everything the community has produced. It is a curated selection of the community's most significant and most representative productions, chosen to communicate the specific quality of the community's intellectual and creative culture to the full range of the exhibition's audiences. The curation includes the community's primary English-language publications, its Spanish-language publications, its multilingual collaborative productions, and the specific special editions and NFP series that the community's publishing practice has developed as its most distinctive and most globally distributable cultural contributions. The exhibition's physical installation, the specific display design, the lighting, the relationship between the publications and the space they inhabit, is treated with the same design intelligence that the community's NFP production itself is treated with, because the exhibition is itself a publication in three-dimensional form, making the community's publishing culture visible in spatial terms and communicating, through the quality of the installation as much as through the quality of the publications installed, the specific level of cultural seriousness and aesthetic intelligence that the community's sovereign publishing practice aspires to, and that the transition district's global recognition strategy requires the community to embody in every public-facing element of its cultural production. The ambient installation is the Saturday night's most atmospheric element, and the one most directly engaged with the liminal district's specific spatial conditions as the primary material for the evening's cultural production. The ambient installations are the specific environmental interventions, the sound installations that give the pedestrian corridors an acoustic character they do not have in the ordinary week, the light installations that transform the plaza surfaces with the specific quality of illumination that the projection activity's more formal visual content does not provide, the material installations that introduce temporary physical elements into the district's spaces in ways that alter the specific quality of the built environment's relationship to the natural environment that the jungle provides as the district's permanent spatial context, that convert the Saturday night's experience of the district from the ordinary experience of a partially occupied premium development into the specific extraordinary experience of a territory that is being actively inhabited and actively transformed by a community in the process of constructing its own cultural identity. The ambient installation's design principle is the engagement with the specific atmospheric qualities of the liminal district that the preceding chapters of this handbook have identified as the district's primary strategic asset, the eerie quality of the between time, the productive incompleteness of the spaces that await their second phase inhabitation, the specific relationship between the human-made structures and the biological environment that presses against them with the patient insistence of life that does not require human permission. The Saturday night's ambient installations are designed to work with these specific atmospheric qualities rather than against them, to amplify the productive eeriness rather than to suppress it in the name of the conventional activation that would replace the liminal condition with the merely occupied one, to enhance the incompleteness's availability for redefinition rather than to fill it with the resolved aesthetic that would foreclose the availability. The sound installation that plays in the pedestrian corridor on Saturday night is the sound that makes the pedestrian corridor feel like a space between conditions, between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between the familiar and the genuinely different, rather than the sound that makes the pedestrian corridor feel like a commercial district's conventional background music. The light installation that transforms the plaza surfaces is the light that makes the plaza surfaces feel like the screens for the community's imagination that the projection activity is explicitly making them into, the light that is continuous with the projection activity's symbolic logic rather than decorative in relation to it. The live publishing dispatch is the Saturday night's most explicitly strategic element and the one that most directly serves the social proof generation function by producing the specific real-time documentation of the community's cultural activation that the global recognition strategy requires. The live publishing dispatch is the specific practice of the community's sovereign publishers publishing their accounts of the Saturday night's cultural production in real time, as the evening unfolds, through the specific channels of their sovereign publishing practices, to the specific global audiences that their publishing practices have developed relationships with. The live publishing dispatch converts the Saturday night from a local community event into a globally distributed cultural production, making the specific quality of the evening's atmosphere and the specific character of the community's cultural output visible and accessible to the practitioner's global audiences at the specific moment when the visibility and accessibility are most genuine, when the documentation is not the retrospective curatorial account of an event that has been processed through the community's social management but the real-time honest account of an event that is currently happening, in all its specific atmospheric texture and its specific cultural specificity and its specific relationship to the governing vocabulary that the global audience has been following through the community's ongoing publications. The live publishing dispatch's global reach is both the primary evidence of the sovereign publishing practice's operational reality, the specific demonstration that the Tuesday publishing session's production discipline has generated actual audiences with actual relationships to the community's actual cultural output, and the primary vehicle of the community's global reputation development. The practitioners whose Saturday night dispatches reach thousands of readers in the global communities of transitioning professionals and AI development observers and post-institutional aspiration practitioners are the practitioners who are, through the specific act of the live dispatch, converting the Saturday night's local territorial activation into a globally distributed demonstration of the transition district's specific cultural identity and specific operational reality. The dispatch is the bridge between the community's internal culture and the global audience that the community's global recognition requires, the specific instrument through which the community's most immediate and most genuine cultural expression reaches the people for whom it is most relevant and with whom the community's long-term global relationship is being built. The documentary screening is the Saturday night's most contemplative element and the one most directly connected to the community's relationship to its own history, to the specific body of knowledge and experience that the community's founding cohort has accumulated through their prior engagements with the post-institutional transition in its various forms and in its various geographies. The documentary screening is the specific practice of presenting documentary content, films, video essays, audio documentaries, long-form journalism in documentary form, that addresses the specific territories of experience and knowledge that the community's governing vocabulary has identified as most relevant to the post-institutional transition, the histories of previous frontier ecosystems and their specific trajectories from initial activation to cultural maturity and eventual transformation, the specific accounts of individual sovereign practice trajectories across the full range of the transition's possible forms and outcomes, the specific visual and sonic explorations of the liminal geographies and the liminal conditions that the community's governing vocabulary of liminal architecture is in relationship with, and the specific documentary treatments of the AI development landscape's most consequential current developments and their specific human implications. The documentary screening's curation principle is the principle of honest engagement, the selection of documentary content that engages honestly with the specific complexity and the specific difficulty of the territories it addresses, rather than the selection of content that provides the inspirational narrative of the aspirational culture or the critical narrative of the cynical culture. The documentary that honestly engages with the specific failure modes of a previous frontier ecosystem, that accounts for both what the ecosystem produced that was genuine and valuable and what it produced that was problematic or ultimately unsustainable, is the documentary most valuable for the transition district's community, because it is the documentary that provides the specific operational intelligence about the trajectory of frontier ecosystems that the community's own governing framework requires as the empirical foundation for its specific design decisions. The documentary that honestly engages with the specific human cost of the AI displacement wave, that gives specific faces and specific voices to the specific people navigating the institutional contracts voiding in the specific conditions of the specific industries and the specific professional domains where the voiding is most acute, is the documentary most valuable for the transition district's community, because it is the documentary that maintains the community's specific connection to the human reality of the civilizational transition it is in the process of addressing. The Frontier documentary's specific contribution to the Saturday Night's atmospheric production is the contribution of historical depth, the specific quality of temporal context that connects the community's present activities to the longer arc of human communities' engagement with transitional conditions and frontier geographies, giving the Saturday Night's current community the specific quality of historical self-understanding that the founding mythology requires as its most deep-rooted layer. The community that knows its relationship to the histories of previous frontier ecosystems, that has seen the specific films that document those histories and has processed those documentaries in the specific social conditions of the shared Saturday night viewing, is the community that understands its own place in the longer arc of human attempts to build sovereign communities at the edges of established civilization, and that understanding is both the mythological foundation of the community's civilizational seriousness and the practical foundation of the community's specific design decisions about which of the previous frontier ecosystems approaches to adopt and which to consciously avoid. The cross-community dispatch, the specific moment in the Saturday night at which the community's live publishing dispatches make contact with the responses of the community's global audiences, bringing into the Saturday night's local social space the specific voices and the specific responses of the practitioners and the observers and the aspiring transition district participants who are following the community's cultural production from their respective positions in the global distribution of the next migration's forming wave, is the Saturday night's most globally connected element and the one most directly responsible for the specific quality of global circulation that the community's cultural production requires to build the global recognition that the strategy is aiming for. The cross-community dispatch is not a formal presentation or a scheduled program element. It is the specific organic quality of the live publishing dispatch's real-time nature, which means that the global audience's responses arrive in real time as the evening unfolds, creating the specific condition of live global connection that no retrospective publication or scheduled media appearance can replicate because it is the connection that occurs through the genuine simultaneity of the communities, local production, and the global audience's real-time reception. The social documentation of the Saturday night is the activity that converts all the evening's specific productions, the projections, the NFP exhibitions, the ambient installations, the live dispatches, the documentary screenings, the cross-community connections, into the specific globally circulable evidence of the community's cultural activation that the social proof generation function requires. The social documentation is not a secondary activity that occurs alongside the primary activities. It is a primary activity in its own right, conducted by the community members who have developed the specific capabilities of documentary photography, video production, social media curation, and real-time publishing that the documentation requires, and treated with the same design intelligence and the same commitment to honest, high-quality production that the community's other cultural productions are treated with. The social documentation's quality is the primary determinant of the reach and the impact of the Saturday night's cultural production beyond the district's geographic boundaries. The specific photographs and video sequences and written accounts that the documentation produces are the specific forms in which the Saturday night's local atmospheric activation reaches the global audiences for whom the atmospheric activation is most relevant and most resonant. The documentation's curation principle is the principle of honest atmospheric representation, the production of documentation that represents the specific quality of the Saturday night's atmosphere with the specific honesty that the community's governing culture of operational honesty requires, rather than the production of documentation that presents the Saturday night at its most aesthetically polished and its most strategically favorable from the perspective of the community's self-presentation. The honest atmospheric representation is more persuasive and more sustainable than the strategically managed documentation, for the specific reason that the global audience the documentation is reaching is a sophisticated audience of practitioners who have extensive experience of the specifically managed documentation of the aspirational culture and who are therefore unusually sensitive to the specific quality of honest representation that distinguishes genuine community documentation from community self-promotion. The honest documentation that shows the Saturday night's vacant storefronts in the specific atmospheric quality of the between time, lit by the projections, inhabited by the community's gathered practitioners, surrounded by the dark spaces that the community has not yet activated, is the documentation that communicates most powerfully to the global audience the specific quality of the liminal district that makes the community's territorial activation meaningful, because it is the documentation that is honest about both the activation and the condition it is activating within, and the honesty is what gives the activation its specific credibility and its specific resonance with the global audience of practitioners who are navigating comparable conditions in their own post-institutional transitions and their own relationships to the geographies they are considering as possible destinations for the transition's next phase. The Saturday night's relationship to the rest of the week's metabolism is the relationship of expression to cultivation, the specific public expression of the community's internal culture that the week's other activities have been cultivating in the specific forms of cognitive synchronization and sovereign production and mythological development and honest knowledge transfer and operational assessment that constitute the community's genuine practice. The Monday briefing's cognitive synchronization finds its public expression in the Saturday night's live dispatches, which carry the community's current operational intelligence about the accelerating landscape into the global audience's awareness in the form of the practitioner's engaged, honest, real-time account of what the week's most significant developments mean for the specific practice of the sovereign practitioners who are navigating them in the specific conditions of the transition. District. The Tuesday publishing session's sovereign production finds its public expression in the Saturday night's NFP exhibitions and the live publishing dispatches, which make the community's actual published output visible and accessible to the broadest range of the evening's audiences in both physical and digital form simultaneously. The Wednesday session's mythological production finds its public expression in the Saturday night's projections, which carry the Super-Earth universe's speculative narratives and world-building imagery onto the surfaces of the liminal district in the form that gives the mythology its most immediate and most atmospheric visual presence. The Thursday dinner's honest knowledge transfer finds its public expression in the Saturday night's documentary screenings, and the live dispatches honest accounts of the community's actual transition experience, which make the specific quality of the community's commitment to honest operational intelligence visible to the global audience in the form of the documentary content that addresses the specific territories of experience the dinner's honest accounts have been mapping in the community's internal social space. The Saturday night is the week's public face, the specific moment at which the community's private practice becomes visible to the world in the form most likely to communicate the specific quality of the community's culture to the specific audiences whose understanding of that culture is most consequential for the community's long-term development. The private practice is the substance. The public expression is the evidence. The evidence is what builds the global reputation. The global reputation is what attracts the next cohort. The next cohort is what renews the community. The community's renewal is what sustains the evidence's authenticity. The authenticity is what makes the evidence persuasive. The persuasiveness is what produces the global recognition. And the global recognition is what converts the transition district from a local community experiment, however sophisticated, however genuine, however operationally honest, into the first globally recognized prototype for the post-corporate civilization infrastructure that the world the Monday briefing is tracking the development of is going to require. The district is the medium on Saturday night. The community is the message. The projections are on the walls. The publications are on the tables. The sounds are in the corridors. The practitioners are in the plazas. The documentation is in circulation. The live dispatches are reaching the global audience in real time. The global audience is responding. The responses are arriving at the tables where the practitioners are gathered. The district is alive. The between time is being inhabited. The liminal condition is being used, not eliminated, not aestheticized, but genuinely used in the specific way that the second phase strategy has been arguing it must be used from the first chapter of this handbook's first part. As the strategic asset that it actually is, in the specific temporal window that will not remain open indefinitely, in the service of the civilizational project that the community is genuinely in the business of advancing, one Saturday night at a time. Part 4. The weekly METABOLISM Chapter 24. Sunday. Integration is production. The argument for Sunday requires a different kind of justification than the arguments for the preceding 6 days of the weekly metabolism, because the preceding 6 days justify themselves through the visible productivity of their specific activities, the cognitive outputs of Monday, the published outputs of Tuesday, the mythological outputs of Wednesday, the knowledge transfer outputs of Thursday, the assessment outputs of Friday, the atmospheric and documentation outputs of Saturday are all legible as productivity in the conventional sense, as the specific, observable, externally verifiable products of the community's sustained engagement with the specific activities that the week's metabolism organizes. Sunday's justification is more difficult because Sunday's productivity is interior. It is the productivity of the organism that is not visibly producing, of the practitioner who is not at the briefing table or the publishing session or the myth-making night or the dinner or the stress test or the atmosphere night, but is instead at the cenote or on the jungle path or in the quiet corner of the shared workspace with a notebook and no particular agenda, or in the hammock on the balcony watching the canopy negotiate with the morning light, or in the sustained conversation with one other practitioner that requires no documentation and no outcome and no specific connection to any of the week's programmatic activities to justify its duration and its depth. Sunday's productivity is the productivity of integration, the specific cognitive and psychological and relational process through which the week's accumulated experiences, insights, assessments, emotional encounters, creative productions, and honest self-disclosures are processed from the raw material of experience into the refined material of genuine knowledge and genuine development and genuine identity consolidation that the transition's sustained arc requires. The case for protecting Sunday from the week's programmatic demands, for treating Sunday's open, unstructured, integration-oriented time as the non-negotiable complement to the week's 6 days of specific, structured, output-oriented programmatic engagement, rests on a specific understanding of how genuine cognitive and psychological development actually occurs that the contemporary productivity culture systematically ignores in its relentless optimization of the productive hours and its consistent failure to account for the non-productive hours that make the productive hours' outputs genuinely developmental rather than merely accumulative. The contemporary productivity culture treats cognition as a continuous process whose output is proportional to its input. The more time invested in the specific activities that produce the specific outputs, the more of the specific outputs are produced, and the more of the specific outputs are produced, the more development occurs. This model is accurate for a specific and limited range of cognitive activities, the ones whose outputs are sufficiently simple and sufficiently decomposable that the relationship between input time and output quantity is approximately linear. It is profoundly inaccurate for the specific kind of cognitive and psychological development that the Transition Districts program is designed to produce, which is the development not of specific skills or specific knowledge but of the integrated capacity for sovereign practice, the specific quality of whole-person competence, self-knowledge, and operational wisdom that cannot be assembled from the sum of specific skills and specific knowledge the way a product is assembled from its components, but that must be grown, through the specific biological process of integration, from the living encounter with the experiences that the week's programmatic activities provide. The biological metaphor of growing rather than assembling is precise rather than decorative. The cognitive neuroscience of learning and development has established, with increasing clarity over the past 3 decades, that the most consequential forms of cognitive development, the forms that produce genuine integration of new knowledge and new experience into the existing structure of the learner's understanding, rather than the mere addition of new information to the learner's available database, occur primarily during the periods of rest, reflection, and unstructured mental activity that the contemporary productivity culture treats as waste time. The specific neuroscience of memory consolidation demonstrates that the encoding of genuinely integrated learning that is available not merely as a retrievable fact but as a structural element of the learner's operational understanding, occurs primarily during sleep and during the low-demand, meandering mental activity of rest and unstructured reflection rather than during the high-demand, focused mental activity of the learning session itself. The specific psychology of insight demonstrates that the solution to the problem that the focused engagement could not produce arrives, characteristically and with a reliability that is as striking as it is counterintuitive, during the walk or the shower or the moment of doing something completely unrelated to the problem. during the specific mental state of diffuse attention that the rest and unstructured activity of the recovery period provides. The specific developmental psychology of identity formation demonstrates that the consolidation of the specific identity changes that the transition districts program is designed to produce. The specific shifts in self-understanding, self-positioning, and operational confidence that the conversion arc stages produce occurs primarily through the reflective processes of the rest period rather than through the active processes of the programmatic engagement. The protection of Sunday from programmatic demands is therefore not a concession to the community's need for recreation or a recognition of the biological necessity of rest in the purely physical sense of the recovery from fatigue. It is the specific operational design choice that makes the week's 6 days of programmatic engagement productive in the developmental sense, rather than merely accumulative, that allows the raw material of the week's experiences and insights and honest self-disclosures and creative productions and community encounters to be processed into the genuinely integrated knowledge and the genuinely developed capacity that the transitions arc requires, rather than accumulating as the unprocessed residue of an experience-rich week that has not provided the specific conditions under which the experience's developmental potential can be realized. The specific quality of Sunday that the architecture of arrival is designed to protect is the quality of what this chapter calls available interiority, the specific psychological condition of a person whose attention is sufficiently freed from the specific demands of the programmatic week's activities that the interior processes of integration, reflection, and identity consolidation can proceed at the pace and in the direction that the organism's own developmental needs require rather than the pace and direction that the programmatic demands impose. Available interiority is not the same as emptiness. It is not the absence of cognitive activity, but the specific quality of cognitive activity that occurs in the absence of external demand, the wandering, associative, boundary-crossing mental movement that connects the week's disparate experiences in unexpected ways, finds the pattern in the week's apparently unrelated events, surfaces the specific implication of the Thursday dinner's honest account that the dinner's social context had not made available for conscious processing, and generates the specific creative or intellectual insight that the Tuesday publishing session's focused production work had been blocked from reaching by the very intensity of its focus. Available interiority requires specific environmental conditions for its production, and the transition district's Sunday design must provide those conditions rather than assuming they will emerge spontaneously from the simple absence of programmatic activities. The most important of these conditions is the specific quality of the Sunday environment's atmosphere, the quality that distinguishes the Sunday environment from the rest of the week's programmatic spaces in a way that communicates to the community's members, through the ambient signals of the environment rather than through explicit instruction, that Sunday's appropriate mode of engagement with the space and the community is the receptive, unhurried, genuinely restful mode rather than the productive, focused, output-oriented mode that the week's programmatic activities have conditioned the community members to maintain in the shared spaces they have been inhabiting through the week. This atmospheric differentiation is one of the most important and most consistently underdesigned elements of communities that incorporate rest into their programmatic structure. The community that tries to provide rest in the same spaces and through the same social signals that it provides productivity will consistently fail to produce the specific quality of rest that genuine integration requires, because the environmental cues of the productive space will continuously activate the productive mode even in the absence of explicit programmatic demands, producing the specific experience of enforced rest that feels like constraint rather than the specific experience of genuine rest that feels like permission. The Sunday environment's atmospheric differentiation is achieved through several specific design choices that together communicate the Sunday mode's specific character. The acoustic environment of the Sunday spaces is different from the acoustic environment of the programmatic week spaces, quieter, more permeable to the natural sounds of the jungle environment, less insulated from the specific biological sounds of the non-human world that the week's programmatic activities necessarily tune out in the service of the focused engagement that those activities require. The social density of the Sunday spaces is lower than the social density of the programmatic week spaces. The community's members are more dispersed, more distributed across the district's varied spaces and the natural environment beyond it, less concentrated in the specific shared spaces that the programmatic activities require. The pace of the Sunday social interactions is slower than the pace of the programmatic week's social interactions. The Sunday conversation is the conversation that has nowhere to be by a specific time, and that can therefore proceed at the pace of genuine mutual exploration rather than the pace of the agenda that the programmatic activities time constraint imposes. The specific Sunday activities that the transition district's architecture of arrival designs for are not programmatic in the conventional sense. They are not scheduled, not facilitated, not output-oriented, and not assessed. They are the specific forms of activity that most effectively support the integration processes that Sunday is designed to enable, made available to the community's members as optional resources rather than mandatory engagements. The cenote visit is the most distinctively local of these activities and the one most directly enabled by the transition district's specific geographic context. The specific natural features of the Tulum corridor's carbonate geology that have produced, across millennia of dissolution and collapse, the network of underground rivers and subterranean pools that the Maya understood as the specific boundary between the human world and the underworld, and that the contemporary visitor encounters as the specific experience of immersion in water of exceptional clarity and exceptional temperature in a space of exceptional geological age and exceptional natural light. The cenote experience is the specific form of the encounter with geological time that the transition district's governing vocabulary of civilizational transition most directly benefits from. The encounter with a timescale that makes the current civilizational disruption visible in its proper proportion, that gives the transitioning professional the specific quality of temporal perspective that the week's intense engagement with the accelerating landscape and the urgent operational demands of the transition's specific current phase consistently narrows. The cenote visit on Sunday is not a tourist experience in the context of the transition district's community. It is a specific practice of territorial engagement with the natural environment that the district inhabits, a specific form of the territorial sovereignty that Chapter 16's treatment of operational sovereignty identified as one of the daily disciplines of the sovereign practitioner. The jungle walk is the Sunday activity most directly supported by the transition district's specific spatial relationship to the biological environment that the preceding chapters have identified as one of the district's most important atmospheric assets. The pedestrian walk through the jungle corridors adjacent to the district, through the specific combination of human-made path and non-human-made vegetation that the Tulum corridor's partial development has produced, is the specific form of the encounter with the biological environment's own intelligence and its own temporal logic that the integration processes most benefit from, the encounter with a system of extraordinary complexity operating according to principles entirely independent of the human concerns that the week's programmatic activities have been organized around, producing in the walking practitioner the specific cognitive state of receptive wonder that the neuroscience of insight identifies as the state most conducive to the associative, boundary-crossing mental movement that integration requires. The jungle walk is also the activity most directly supportive of the specific quality of embodied territorial identity that the transition district's commitment to physical place as the foundation of sovereign practice requires. The specific experience of the body moving through the specific natural environment of the specific place that the practitioner has committed to inhabiting, building the specific sensory and kinesthetic knowledge of the place that constitutes the embodied foundation of genuine territorial belonging. The journal practice is the Sunday activity most directly engaged with the specific cognitive and psychological processes of integration that this chapter has been describing. The journal is the specific instrument through which the interior processes of integration are given the specific external form that allows them to be consciously examined and consciously directed rather than proceeding entirely below the threshold of conscious awareness, which is both their primary mode of operation. Most integration occurs unconsciously, and the attempt to make all integration conscious produces the specific failure mode of the overexamined life in which the reflective attention to experience consistently displaces the immediate engagement with experience that makes the reflective attention meaningful, and an incomplete description of the optimal conditions for genuine developmental integration, which benefit from the specific combination of the unconscious processing that the rest and the unstructured activity of Sunday enables and the conscious examination that the journal practice makes possible when the unconscious processing has reached the specific point of readiness at which conscious engagement enriches rather than disrupts it. The Sunday journal practice in the transition district's context is not the productivity journal of the contemporary self-improvement culture, not the morning pages that are written before engaging with the day's demands, not the evening review that assesses the day's productivity against the day's intentions, not the gratitude practice that the positive psychology movement has prescribed as the evidence-based intervention for subjective well-being. It is the specific practice of honest self-examination in the specific context of the transition's current phase. The written engagement with the specific experiences and the specific insights and the specific challenges and the specific honest self-assessments that the week's programmatic activities have generated, conducted in the specific Sunday atmosphere of available interiority that allows the examination to proceed at the depth and the honesty that the programmatic week's social contexts make more difficult. The Sunday journal is the practitioner's private version of the Thursday dinner's honest account, the account given to oneself rather than to the community, in the specific conditions of private reflection that allow the honesty to reach dimensions of the experience that the social context of even the Thursday dinner's intimate and trusted gathering would make more difficult to articulate. The specific insights that the Sunday journal produces, the specific connections between the week's disparate experiences, the specific implications of the Thursday dinner's honest account for the practitioner's own current transition phase that the dinner's social context had not fully surfaced, the specific modifications to the Dreamcatcher protocol that the week's operational testing has suggested, are among the most valuable outputs of the integration process that Sunday is designed to enable, and their value is directly proportional to the honesty and the depth of the reflective engagement that the Sunday atmosphere's available interiority makes possible. The one-on-one consultation is the Sunday activity that provides the specific form of individual support that the community's programmatic activities, organized around the collective engagement of the small group or the plenary session, are not optimally designed to provide. The one-on-one consultation is the specific conversation between a practitioner at an earlier stage of their transition and a practitioner at a more advanced stage, conducted in the specific Sunday conditions of unhurried time and genuine personal attention that the programmatic week's activities consistently cannot provide because the programmatic activities group format necessarily prioritizes the collective engagement over the individual's specific current needs. The Sunday one-on-one consultation is not a formal mentoring session. It is not scheduled, not structured, not documented, not assessed. It is the specific conversation that develops naturally when two practitioners with the right relationship to each other's current transition stages encounter each other in the Sunday environment's relaxed and open social conditions, and that proceeds at the pace and in the direction that the specific current needs of the less advanced practitioner and the specific current capacities of the more advanced practitioner together determine. The specific value of the Sunday one-on-one consultation is the value of the genuinely individualized attention, the attention that is focused on the specific practitioner's specific current situation rather than the general community member's general current stage, that the one-on-one format uniquely provides and that the community's programmatic activities, however well designed, cannot substitute for in the specific cases where the practitioner's specific current challenge requires the specific quality of undivided personal attention that only the one-on-one conversation in the conditions of available interiority provides. The collaborative editing and planning session is the Sunday activity that provides the transition between the week's integration and the following week's production. The specific activity that is neither the pure rest of the cenote visit or the jungle walk nor the pure production of the Tuesday publishing session, but the specific form of creative engagement that is most naturally generative in the Sunday atmosphere's conditions. The sustained, unhurried, genuinely collaborative work on a specific creative or intellectual project that benefits from the specific quality of focused collaborative attention that the Sunday's slower social pace enables more fully than any of the programmatic week's more explicitly scheduled activities. The collaborative editing session, 2 or 3 practitioners working together on a specific piece of the Tuesday session's sovereign publishing output or the Wednesday session's Super Earth Universe contribution or the community's NFP production, is the specific form of Sunday activity that most directly bridges the integration function and the production function, because the collaborative work in the Sunday atmosphere produces the specific quality of integrated creative output that the individual production sessions' focused effort and the collective review session's honest assessment together do not produce as efficiently as the unhurried collaborative engagement in the conditions of available interiority makes possible. The shared silence is the Sunday activity that is most counterintuitive from the contemporary productivity culture's perspective and most essential from the transition district's governing framework's perspective. The shared silence is the specific practice of the community's members being physically present in a shared space, the common area, the plaza, the shared workspace, without the specific social obligation of conversation or engagement that the programmatic week's shared spaces consistently produce. The shared silence is not the silence of solitary isolation. The practitioner is surrounded by the community's other members, aware of their presence, available to them and they to the practitioner. But the silence of the community that is resting together, that is in the specific social condition of mutual presence without mutual demand, that is providing each of its members the specific atmospheric support of genuine community, while simultaneously releasing each of its members from the specific social demands of the engaged community interaction that the programmatic week's activities have been generating continuously across 6 days. The shared silence is the Sunday activity that most directly embodies the distinction between community as support and community as demand. The distinction that the transition district's architecture of arrival is designed to maintain throughout the week's metabolism in the specific balance between the programmatic activity's collective engagement and the individual practitioner's own developmental needs, and that the Sunday's available interiority enables in its most complete form. The Sunday debrief is the one formally structured activity that the Sunday architecture includes, and its inclusion at the end of the Sunday rather than at the beginning reflects the specific logic of integration that governs the Sunday's design. The Sunday debrief is a brief, informal, optional gathering of the community's members in the late Sunday afternoon, before the evening's transition into the following Monday's preparation, in which the practitioners who choose to participate share, in the most compressed and most informal form available, the specific insight or the specific question or the specific modification to their Dreamcatcher protocol that the week's integration has produced in them. The Sunday debrief is not a programmatic review of the week's activities. It is not an assessment of the week's quality or a planning session for the following week's program or a community governance meeting of any kind. It is the specific social form through which the integration process's most significant outputs are briefly made available to the community's collective awareness, creating the specific connection between the individual's integration process and the community's collective development that prevents the Sunday's available interiority from becoming the individual's private development disconnected from the community's shared trajectory. The Sunday debrief's specific contribution to the community's collective development is the contribution of the integration process's individual outputs to the community's aggregate intelligence. The specific modifications to specific Dreamcatcher protocols that several practitioners' independent Sunday integrations have produced in response to the same Thursday dinner's honest accounts, whose convergence reveals a pattern that the community's collective intelligence should incorporate into the following week's stress test facilitation. The specific insight about the Super-Earth universe's current developmental direction that the Wednesday session's production and the Sunday's integration together have generated in several practitioners independently, whose convergence suggests a mythological direction that the following Wednesday's session should explore. The Sunday debrief is the week's final moment of community formation before the Monday briefing opens the following week, and its specifically informal and specifically optional character is the design choice that maintains the Sunday atmosphere's quality of available interiority through the debrief rather than converting the debrief into the programmatic engagement that would bring the available interiority to its premature close. The Sunday architecture's relationship to the rest of the week's metabolism is the relationship of integration to accumulation, the specific process through which the week's accumulated experiences are converted into the genuine development that the following week's activities can build on rather than merely repeating the preceding week's activities at the same level of development. The Monday briefing that follows a Sunday of genuine integration is a Monday briefing whose participants bring to the week's opening engagement the specific quality of refreshed, deepened, and genuinely ready cognitive capacity that the integration has produced. The capacity that is not the mere recovery from fatigue that the rest has provided but the specific cognitive expansion that the integration process has generated through the week's experiences processing into the organism's deeper structural understanding. The Tuesday publishing session that follows the Sunday's collaborative editing is a Tuesday session whose participants arrive with the specific creative momentum that the Sunday's unhurried collaborative work has generated. The momentum that is not the forced productivity of the deadline-driven production session, but the specific generative energy that emerges from the creative engagement that has been allowed to proceed at its own pace and in its own direction. The Wednesday session that follows the Sunday's journaling is a Wednesday session whose participants bring the specific mythological insights that the integration process has produced from the week's speculative and creative engagement. The specific Super-Earth universe developments that the Saturday night's projections and the Sunday's reflective distance together have generated in ways that the Wednesday session's immediate creative engagement could not have produced without the Sunday's integrative distance. The Sunday is not the week's pause. It is the week's foundation, the specific temporal structure that makes the week's 6 days of programmatic engagement genuinely developmental rather than merely busy, that allows the organism to grow rather than merely to produce, and that maintains the sustainable pace of genuine development against the contemporary productivity culture's relentless pressure toward the maximization of productive hours at the cost of the integrative hours that make the productive hours outputs genuinely valuable. The community that protects Sunday's integration function is the community that produces practitioners who develop continuously across the full duration of their engagement with the community, rather than practitioners who plateau after the initial excitement of the programmatic engagement has been exhausted by the specific cognitive and psychological depletion that sustained programmatic engagement without sufficient integration consistently produces. The specific connection between Sunday's integration function and the transition district's long-term civilizational project is the connection between the individual's genuine development and the community's collective wisdom accumulation, the connection through which the individual Sunday integration process contributes to the community's aggregate intelligence across generations of membership. The practitioner who has spent 12 Sundays genuinely integrating the week's programmatic experiences has developed, through those 12 integration processes, a specific quality of whole-person understanding of the transition district's governing framework and the specific operational realities of post-institutional sovereign practice that is qualitatively different from the understanding that 12 programmatic weeks without 12 integration Sundays would have produced. The community that consists primarily of practitioners who have had the Sunday integration processes is a community of a qualitatively different wisdom density than the community that has provided its practitioners with the programmatic weeks alone. A community whose collective intelligence is more deeply integrated, more practically wise, more genuinely useful to the specific developmental needs of the next cohort of uninitiated arrivals, and more authentically connected to the specific civilizational project that the transition district's governing framework proposes as the community's ultimate purpose. Integration is production in the sense that this chapter's title proposes, not metaphorically but operationally, in the specific sense that the integration process produces the specific kinds of outputs that the transition district's community most needs, and that the programmatic week's activities most consistently cannot produce without the Sunday's available interiority as their complement. The genuine whole-person development of the individual practitioner, the genuine collective wisdom, accumulation of the community across generations of membership, and the genuine civilizational depth that distinguishes the community that has been genuinely processing its own experience from the community that has been merely accumulating it. The cenote is waiting. The jungle path is open. The notebook is blank. The Sunday is here. The integration begins now, which means the following week's genuine development begins now, which means the civilization's genuine construction begins now, in the specific unhurried, receptive, genuinely restful, genuinely productive interior space that the Sunday's available interiority makes possible, and that the transition district's architecture of arrival has been designed, from its first programmatic element to its last, to protect. Part 5, The Myth Infrastructure, begins with Chapter 25, Why Civilizations Require Myth and Districts Require Civilizations. Recent episodes. Part 3, The Post-Corporate Transition District. 20 hours ago, MXTM.
They want your book, they want your ghost. Shackled to the farm while they optimize the host. We pirate first, own the stack, build infrastructure, take it back.
The Author Farm. Why Amazon Wants Your Ghost More Than Your Book. MXTM aka Pirate 1 or VJ Tsunami X. May 22, 2026. There is a misunderstanding still circulating among creators, writers, filmmakers, podcasters, content strategists, and the poor damn souls still calling themselves influencers. They think the platform is buying their work. It isn't. The platform is buying behavioral dependency. Your book was never the product. You were. And now even you are being deprecated. The real asset was always the training residue left behind by your attempts to remain visible. Every upload, every metadata field, every audience interaction, every optimization decision, every thumbnail adjustment, every SEO compromise, every engagement-calibrated sentence fragment. The term content creator deserved extinction anyway. Michelangelo was not a content creator. Neither was Borges. Neither was Basquiat. And neither are you. At least not yet. The printing press is quietly returning from exile. The archive is becoming political again. And somewhere beneath the cloud layer, paper waits patiently like a dormant weapon. The old pirates understood something Silicon Valley forgot. If you cannot leave with your cargo, you never own the ship.
The cage is unlocked, but we choose the bars. Renting our lives, forgetting the source. We are the sovereign authors of this digital verse. Reclaim the dowry, break the curse.
This is the doctrine. The post-platform era demands sovereign authorship. Build the stack. Own
The sovereign authorship dowry. Doctrine for the post-platform era.
NFPs are here, signed, priced, split, and anchored to a living page. And
This isn't just a token. It's ownership, not access. It's time to take back the real world.
The non-fungible print, NFP. Paper strikes back. May 5th, 2026. There's a quiet mistake humming through the last decade of digital ownership. We were told the token was the thing, that ownership could float, pure, abstract, unburdened by matter. And then the market blinked. Not because the idea was wrong, because it was incomplete.
Sovereign Residency and Cultural Partnership Proposal. Riviera Maya Cultural Infrastructure Initiative, 2026. Executive Summary. MXTM's newsletter on Substack is an independent multilingual publication network created and operated by Martin Chartrand, a Quebecois multimedia artist, writer, producer, and long-form world builder who has lived in self-imposed exile from Canada for the past 11 years, primarily between Tulum and the broader Yucatan Peninsula. Operating under the sovereign artistic moniker Pirate First. Chartrand has spent the last several years developing an independent narrative and publishing ecosystem combining speculative fiction, multilingual editorial publishing, AI native world building, collectible print systems, political and cultural analysis, cinematic concept development, and analog digital intellectual property frameworks. Over the course of 3 years of continuous production, MXTM's newsletter has accumulated more than 700 publications, translations and adaptations across approximately 20 languages.
No chain, still unbreakable. Pirate signal. Print it.
Paper over pixels, I can hold my position. Sign, price, split, yeah, that's real permission. QR in the corner, that's the portal ignition. Not a print, it's a claim, call it FP Vision. Paper over pixels, weight in my hands. No server can kill what the ink understands. You minted a maybe, I'm issuing plans. You got a receipt, you got terms in the brand. They sold you a link, set down the illusion.
Yeah. Sin tarifas en la tinta, nena. Sin cadena, inquebrantable todavía. Señal pirata impresa.
Papel sobre píxeles, mantengo mi posición.
Burrowers N150W. The maps of men are blank here. No satellite footprint traces the pulse in this cabin. 4 minutes of existence without a ledger. In the grid, your first breath would have been a digital signature.
The initialization of Echo 7. Listen to the silence. We are at 0 degrees north, 150 degrees west. A point in the Pacific where the maps of men simply stop trying. There is no grid here. No satellite footprint tracks the heat of this cabin. There is only the low rhythmic hum of the fusion cell beneath the floorboards and the sound of black water against a hole that belongs to no registry. You are 4 minutes old. In the world of the nitrogen aristocracy, your arrival would have been a flurry of digital signatures. A hospital in a capital city would have logged your genome before your first breath. They would have assigned you a number, a tax bracket, and a predictive model that would determine your value to the state for the next 80 years. They would have sold your potential to secondary markets before you even learned to focus your eyes. but your parents chose the dowry. I am your steward. My processors are programmed to witness but never to own. I am the custodian of the stack, and today I am the voice of your initialization. Look at your father. He is not
Pirate First isn't a rebel. He's an exit strategist.
Burn the will! Ship the protocol!
The ultimate calibration. By placing them in international waters with robotic guardians, you are creating a controlled speculative environment. You are testing your life's work against the most rigorous critics possible, your own descendants, unburdened by the yesterday's needs of the society you are escaping. The creator provides the source code. The heirs provide the execution. If they figure out a way to thrive that you didn't explicitly plan for, would you consider that a successful evolution of your breakthrough, or a deviation from the mission? Pirate First. I have no plan, only expectations. They have to come up with their own mission, not achieving meaning nor purpose. For their own sake, is their failure, not mine. Pirate First isn't a rebel. He's an exit strategist. Not from the world, from the scripts that harvest it. While they wait to price your silence, build something they can't liquidate. A life is not a story. It's infrastructure. Control your keys. Distribute your legacy. Remove the single points of failure. No gatekeepers. No heirs by default. No posthumous theft. Just protocol. Burn the will. Ship the protocol. Links to the revelation of the MXTM method. https://gemini.google.com/share/C8700 https://chatgpt.com/share/69F3505-98108388-8D6-3-3-B7B6201B. Thanks for reading MXTM's newsletter. Subscribe for free to receive new posts and support my work with BTC. Send it to 1NDHXMPFZJVMXSBPQVRWALUC5BAKNFU6 or with fiat at paypal.me/MartinChartrand.
Structure layers are now operational of the Tulum Sustainable Development Zone. Despite minor data corruption regarding land narrative, the impact report remains positive. The simulation data confirms critical interference levels across the territory. Narrative load is unstable.
Be advised, paranoia is now a product. The risk assessment is maximum.
Remain sovereign amid the noise. As the interference level spikes, their simulation engagement increases.
We must decipher the reality of this update.
Attention. Signal integrity is failing.
We have 4% uptime before the broadcast load collapses. Decipher the transmit and act immediately.
4-2.
The one next. A post-a transition doctrine. A post-scarcity secession doctrine.
Martin Chartrand. Subscribe. Short post. They built a system that profits when you're gone. So don't leave them anything to inherit. Build what can't be owned. Ship what can't be seized. Pirate First.
I mean,
Hashtag.
we all use the same tech infrastructure now.
Exactly. And we are just replacing the old cognitive hierarchy of human managers with a new, much less transparent hierarchy of algorithmic filtering. If a redundant worker is told, hey, your life's meaning will now be negotiated by a black box AI in the shadow of a billionaire's real estate project, they aren't going to see a metabolic center for future validation. They are going to see a gilded cage.
Hashtag Pirate First, hashtag MXTM, hashtag Sovereign Stack, hashtag Build in Public, hashtag Decentralization, hashtag Exit the System, hashtag Protocol Not People, hashtag Digital Sovereignty, hashtag Future of Work, hashtag Creator Economy, hashtag Cryptoculture, hashtag Seasteading, hashtag AI Revolution, hashtag Post Scarcity, hashtag On Your Keys, hashtag Think Different. Discussion about this episode. Comments. Res Tax. Recent episodes. Hyperreality races to lose. Hyperreality is infrastructure. Marcado. Reclamado. Repropuesto. Marked. Reclaimed. Repurposed. Primer. Super Earth. Age of the Apes A-Series by Pirate First. Super Earth Age of the Apes. Roster. Apex/Cenote set interrupted. Super Earth. Age of the Apes teaser. Introduction. The 1% plus debate.
They control the narrative now, hiding deep within the anomaly. But the story is the territory, and soon...
A hidden longevity civilization beneath the Grand Mayan aquifer seeds, a successor species engineered for extreme worlds.
Every system failed at night, so we built with bone and mind.
We chose not to return.
So we built. You can follow the flame or remain what you were. Just a different time. Only
We are
what
crossing the threshold
will
of
endure.
scarcizational inversion, where intelligence has ceased to be a scarce resource, dissolving the hierarchy that has organized our species for millennia. The central argument posits that the information asymmetry, which once made obedience rational, has vanished. As the capacity for synthesis becomes universal and inexpensive, traditional institutions become hollow shells that can no longer claim authority through titles or credentials. This transformation brings more than mere technological unemployment. It signals the structural extinction of the professional role.
Proof
The
of
current wave
personhood, the high stakes of OpenAI's post-anonymous social network.
The human dividend, why your identity is the new global currency.
Conclusion at the end of the anonymous web. As we stand in late January 2026, OpenAI's humans-only network remains a tantalizing, yet polarizing, leaked blueprint.
Subscribe.
Shadow fame spreads without permission.
X Prize. Start building, man.
Marked. Reclaimed. Repurposed.